He grabbed the little girl by the wrist and yanked her off the floor like she was a rag doll, his face twisted into something cold and absolute. "She's leaving tonight," he said to no one in particular, his voice the kind of quiet that made every adult in the room stop breathing. "I don't care if she's crying, pack her things." Sophia was 4 years old. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the grip, and she screamed. That was the moment Elena Marlowe realized she had walked into something she could not walk away from. If you're watching this for the first time, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because this channel is where stories like this live. Stories about ordinary people who end up in extraordinary situations, the kind that change everything. Drop your city or country in the comments below, Sek. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if this one moves you, the next one might just stop you cold. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The ad had been posted at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. Elena found it at 12:03 a.m. on Thursday, sitting at her kitchen table in a Queens apartment that smelled like burnt coffee and overdue bills. Her laptop screen was the only light in the room. Outside, a truck rumbled past and rattled the windows. She almost didn't click it. The listing was sparse. No agency name, no family description beyond 2 young children. The salary figure was listed plainly at the bottom, and when Elena saw it, she read it twice, then a third time, because the number didn't make sense for a nanny job. It was more than she'd made in 4 months of teaching combined. Her mother's hospital statement was sitting under the laptop. Elena didn't need to look at it. She had the number memorized, $47,000. Past due. Collections had already called twice that week. She clicked the link. The application was simple. Name, experience, references. One question at the bottom that felt odd. Are you comfortable working in a household with security personnel? Elena stared at that question for a full minute. Then she typed yes and hit send. She got a call at 7:15 the next morning from a man who identified himself only as Mr. Reyes' household coordinator. His voice was polished, professional, and somehow made her feel like she was applying for a government position rather than a childcare job. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "your application stood out. We'd like to schedule an interview today, this afternoon if possible." "Today?" Elena pulled her robe tighter. She hadn't even made coffee yet. "I have..." She thought about her schedule. She had nothing. She'd been let go from the East Side Learning Center 6 weeks ago when the school's funding was cut. "Okay, what time?" 3 o'clock. The address will be texted to you. Please don't share it with anyone." She almost laughed. "Don't share an address." "That's correct." "Okay," she said. "I won't." She sat there after she hung up, coffee unmade, and thought, that was the strangest 10 seconds of a phone call I've ever had. Then she went to find something to wear that didn't have a marker stain on it. The address was on the Upper East Side. That should have told her something. The building didn't have a sign out front the way most luxury high-rises did. No doorman standing at the edge of the sidewalk waving for cabs. There were 2 men near the entrance, large and still, wearing dark coats despite the mild October weather. They looked at her the way cameras look at you. Recording, not reacting. "Elena Marlowe," she said to the first one. He looked at a tablet, nodded once. 42nd floor. Mr. Reyes will meet you." The elevator was the kind that didn't have floor numbers displayed. It just moved, smooth and fast, and opened directly into a foyer. Mr. Reyes was exactly what she'd imagined. Mid-50s, silver-haired, the posture of someone who spent decades standing at attention for someone else. He shook her hand and led her into a sitting room that could have fit her entire apartment inside it 3 times over. "The family values discretion," he said as they sat. "Before we begin, I need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement." Elena blinked. "For a nanny job?" "For this position, yes." She read the NDA. It was 3 pages. Her hands were steady, but her mind was going in 6 directions at once. Who are these people? What kind of household needs ND as for childcare? Should I leave? But then she thought about $47,000 past due and the way the collections agent's voice had gone flat and bureaucratic when he said the words legal action. She signed. Mr. Reyes didn't look surprised. He simply collected the pages, folded them, and said, "The children are Mateo, age 6, and Sophia, age 4. They've had 4 nannies in the past 18 months. None stayed longer than 3 weeks. Why did they leave?" He paused. "The household environment can be intense." "Intense how?" "You'll understand when you meet the family." She decided right then that she didn't like Mr. Reyes. Not because he was unkind, but because he was carefully, deliberately giving her just enough to keep going without actually telling her anything. "When would I start?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning, if you accept." Elena looked at her hands. She thought about Mateo and Sophia. 2 names she didn't know yet, 2 small people she'd never met. 4 nannies in 18 months. She knew what that did to kids. She'd seen it in her classroom. The ones who'd been passed from person to person got a look in their eyes, cautious, watchful, always waiting for the next person to leave. "I accept," she said. Mr. Reyes nodded, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite relief, but something adjacent to it, like he'd been hoping she'd say yes. She noticed that. She filed it away. She told her mother that night. Ruth Marlowe was 61 years old, sharp as a blade despite the oxygen tube she'd started wearing 2 months ago, and she had a reliable radar for when her daughter was making a questionable decision. "A private household," Ruth said, "on the Upper East Side." "Yes." "And they made you sign an NDA." "Yes." "Elena, the salary is—" "I heard you the first time." Ruth's voice went quiet in the way it did when she was choosing her words carefully. "I don't want you doing something dangerous because of my bills." "I'm a nanny, Mom. I'm going to be reading picture books and making mac and cheese." "You said the same thing about that family in Brooklyn, and you came home with a bite mark on your arm." "That was a 4-year-old, and this is different." "How is it different?" Elena didn't have a good answer for that. "I'll call you every day," she said instead. Ruth looked at her for a long moment. "Every day. Promise me." "I promise." Ruth reached over and squeezed her hand. Her grip was still strong. That had always been a relief to Elena, that her mother's hands were still strong. She arrived at 8 a.m. the next morning with a canvas bag, a rolling suitcase, and absolutely no preparation for what she was walking into. Mr. Reyes met her at the elevator again, led her past a kitchen where 2 people were cooking in silence, past a hallway where a man in a suit stood with his hands clasped in front of him, watching her pass, past a security station that had monitors showing feeds from what looked like 40 different cameras. "The children's rooms are through here," Mr. Reyes said. He pushed open a door and there they were. Mateo was sitting at a table with a book open in front of him that he clearly wasn't reading. He had dark eyes and his father's jaw, and the expression of a kid who had been told too many times to sit quietly and wait. When Elena walked in, he looked up and his face went careful and still. The face kids make when they've learned that enthusiasm leads to disappointment. Sophia was on the floor behind him, arms wrapped around a stuffed dog that had lost most of its fur from being loved too hard. She was staring at Elena with the enormous, unblinking eyes of a child who had been watching too many people come and go. Neither of them said hello. Elena crouched down to Sophia's level first. Always start with the one who's most scared. That was the rule she'd learned in her 3rd year of teaching. "Hi," she said. "That dog looks like he's been on a lot of adventures." Sophia looked down at the dog, looked back up. "His name is Captain." "Captain," Elena repeated, nodding seriously. "Good name. He looks like a captain. What does he captain?" Sophia thought about this for a second. "Everything," she decided. "Makes sense." Elena turned to Mateo. "I'm Elena. What are you reading?" Mateo looked at the book. "Nothing." "You're sitting with the book but not reading it." "I don't want to read right now." "That's fair." Elena stood up, looked around the room, spotted a bin of art supplies in the corner. "Do you want to do something else? I'm pretty good at making messes." Mateo's expression didn't change, but something small moved behind his eyes. "Mr. Reyes says we're not supposed to make messes." "Good thing Mr. Reyes isn't here." Elena pulled the bin of supplies closer. Sophia, bring Captain. He looks like the kind of dog who would appreciate a good finger painting. Mutt. By noon, the table was covered in paint and both children were laughing. It wasn't loud, reckless laughter. It was cautious laughter, the kind that pauses every few seconds as if checking whether it's allowed to continue. But it was real. Elena had built a fort out of cardboard boxes from the supply closet, declared it the royal palace of Captain the dog, and somehow talked Matteo into narrating the story of how Captain had once single-handedly stopped an invasion of paper towel pirates. Matteo had a story in him. That was the thing Elena noticed first. The boy had a whole world in his head that nobody had thought to ask about. That was when the door opened. She heard it before she saw it, the particular sound of a door opening in a room that suddenly went very still. She looked up from behind the cardboard fort, and there he was. Adrian Valenti was not what she expected. She didn't know what she'd expected exactly, but it wasn't someone who looked like that. Tall enough that he seemed to take up more of the doorway than was geometrically justified. Dark suit, dark eyes, the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something more severe. He stood there and looked at the room, the paint, the cardboard, the chaos, and his expression didn't move a millimeter. The children went very quiet. Sophia tucked herself behind Elena without fully registering she was doing it. Matteo sat up straight and folded his hands like he was in school. That told Elena everything she needed to know about this man in under 4 seconds. "You're the nanny," Adrian said. Not a question. "Elena Marlowe." She stood up, keeping her voice even. "And this is not how I expected to find my children." Elena looked around at the paint and cardboard. She looked back at him. "They were bored and unhappy when I arrived. They're not bored and unhappy now." Something moved in his jaw. "The previous staff kept this room organized." "The previous staff left after 3 weeks," Elena said, "multiple times." The silence after that was the kind that had weight to it. Adrian Valenti looked at her, really looked, the way people do when they're not used to being answered back. And she met it without stepping back, because she had learned a long time ago in a classroom full of 6-year-olds that the moment you flinch, you lose the room. "Clean this up," he said finally, "and come to my office. We need to discuss the terms of your employment more specifically." He left without waiting for an answer. Matteo let out a breath. He'd been holding it the whole time. "Is he mad?" Sophia whispered, still behind Elena's shoulder. Elena thought about it honestly. "He's surprised," she said. "There's a difference." Matteo looked at her like he wasn't sure he believed that. "Come on," Elena said. "Help me put Captain somewhere safe before we clean up. He doesn't want to get paint on his fur. He's a professional." The office was at the end of a different hallway. A man she hadn't seen before was standing outside it, and he looked at her the way the men at the entrance had, like a camera. She knocked. "Come in." Adrian was behind a desk that was completely clear except for a single folder. He didn't offer her a seat, but she sat down anyway. "Miss Marlowe," he said. "Mr. Valenti. You understand the household operates under specific security protocols." Mr. Reyes explained some of it. What he explained was the surface. Adrian folded his hands on the desk. "I'm going to tell you what he didn't, not because I want you to stay, but because it's only fair to you to have the full picture before you make that decision." Elena waited. He said it plainly. No preamble. No gentleness. "My business interests are varied. Some are legitimate. Some are connected to organizations that operate outside conventional law. My family name carries weight in circles that can be dangerous. The security in this household is not decorative." Elena sat very still. "My children's previous caregivers left when they understood the reality of what this household is," he continued. "I don't hold that against them. Anyone with good sense would do the same. I am telling you this now so that you can leave with full information and no consequences. Your NDA will not be enforced if you choose to walk away today." Elena looked at him. She thought about Sophia tucked behind her shoulder. She thought about Matteo holding his breath. "What happened to their mother?" she asked. Something crossed his face so fast she almost missed it. "That's not relevant to this conversation." "It's relevant to me," she said. Because whatever happened to her is why those two kids look at the door every time someone leaves the room. Adrian Valenti went very still, the kind of still that came from a person who had perfected the art of not reacting. She died, he said finally. 3 years ago. It was connected to my world. The room was so quiet she could hear a faint sound from somewhere in the building, the HVAC maybe, or traffic from 42 floors below. I want to stay, Elena said. I just told you. I heard you. She leaned forward slightly. Your son was holding his breath, waiting to find out if I'd disappear. Your daughter hid behind me because she's learned that adults leave, and she'd rather not be standing in the open when it happens. She paused. I don't need this to be safe. I need it to matter. And it matters. Adrian stared at her for a long moment. She couldn't read it. Not suspicion exactly, not approval, but something searching, like a man trying to find the angle on something that didn't have an obvious angle. You start Monday, he said. I started today, Elena said. I'll see you at dinner. She stood, and she left, and she made herself walk at a normal pace the entire way back down the hall, because inside she was shaking slightly, and she would rather eat a cardboard box than let that man see it. Dinner that night was not what she expected. Matteo ate half his food, which Mr. Reyes said was more than usual. Sophia fell asleep with Captain the dog in her lap before dessert. Elena ate at the kitchen table with two of the household staff who spoke carefully and watched her with the same measuring look everyone in this building seemed to have by default. She was washing her hands in the staff bathroom when she heard footsteps in the hall, and then heard them stop. She came out and almost walked into Adrian Valenti. He stepped back exactly one step. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Sophia fell asleep at the table, he said. I know, I carried her to her room. She doesn't usually let anyone... He stopped. She didn't wake up? No, she was out. Elena paused. She had a big day. Captain stopped a pirate invasion. It's exhausting work. Something moved in his expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. Good night, Miss Marlowe, he said. Good night, Mr. Valenti. She went back to her room. It was larger than her apartment, which was slightly absurd, and sat on the edge of the bed and thought, this is the strangest situation you have ever walked into. And then she thought, but they needed someone to stay. And that was the only thought that mattered enough to let her sleep. 3 days later, Matteo asked her a question while they were stacking blocks on the playroom floor. He didn't look up when he asked it. His eyes stayed on the tower he was building, and his voice was very careful, the way kids' voices get when they're asking the thing they're most afraid to ask. Are you going to leave? He said. Elena looked at him. She didn't answer right away because she'd learned that the wrong answer given too fast felt like a lie, and Matteo was 6 years old and already had a very good radar for lies. I'm not planning on it, she said. The other one said that too. I know. Matteo placed another block on top of the tower, precise and careful. Then why should I believe you? Elena thought about that. You probably shouldn't yet, she said honestly. Believing someone takes time. The only thing I can do is still be here tomorrow, and then the day after that, and then the day after that, until you decide for yourself. Matteo looked at her then, really looked. The kind of look that a 6-year-old shouldn't have to have, old and careful and weighing something. Okay, he said, and placed another block. It was the most fragile thing Elena had ever been handed, smaller than a promise, more important than anything. She kept building with him, and she thought, I am not leaving this apartment, not for anything. She had no idea, sitting on that floor with paint still under her fingernails and cardboard dust in her hair, that in 6 weeks someone would try to make that promise impossible to keep. But she would have made it anyway. She would have made it anyway. 6 weeks later, Elena was standing in the kitchen at 6:47 in the morning, trying to figure out how to make Sophia's eggs the exact right kind of wrong, slightly runny, but not too runny, with the yolk broken just enough that it didn't look like a real yolk, when she heard raised voices coming from behind the closed door of Adrian's study. She'd heard voices before, low ones, the kind that happened at 2 a.m. when she got up to get water, and the hallway was full of men in suits moving fast and quiet. She'd learned to ignore those. That was the deal she'd made with herself. This is not your world. You are here for the children. Keep your eyes forward and your questions unasked. But this was different. This wasn't quiet. Told you it was handled. It wasn't handled, Marco. That's the entire point. You don't understand how Ricci operates. I understand exactly how he operates. I've been watching that man for 11 years. Then silence. The sudden pressurized kind. Elena cracked the eggs into the pan and told herself to focus on the eggs. Sophia came padding into the kitchen in her socks, Captain the dog dragging from one hand, eyes still half closed. She climbed onto her stool at the kitchen counter and leaned her head on her folded arms and watched Elena cook with the dreamy, unfocused expression of a child who was still 60% asleep. "Good morning, Captain," Elena said, because Sophia always needed Captain to be greeted first. "He says good morning," Sophia murmured into her arms. "Tell him his eggs are almost ready." "He doesn't eat eggs. He told me eggs are for humans." "He's very wise." Sophia sat up slightly. She could hear the voices from the study too. Even through the door, even muffled, the tone of it traveled. Her small face went tight in the way it did when she was trying to figure out whether to be scared. "Is Papa fighting?" she asked. "Papa is having a meeting," Elena said. "Very early, very loud, grown-up stuff." "Grown-up stuff is always loud." "Not always." Elena slid the eggs onto the plate, exactly the right kind of wrong. "When I have a meeting with Captain, we keep it very professional." Sophia looked at the stuffed dog. "Captain says grown-ups are weird." "Tell him I agree." The door to the study opened. Elena heard it without looking. Heard footsteps. More than one set, moving fast, moving toward the front of the apartment. Then one set of footsteps coming the other way. Slower. Controlled. Adrian appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was already dressed, which meant he hadn't slept or had slept in his clothes, and there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. He looked at Sophia first. Something in his face shifted, not softened exactly, but rearranged. "Good morning," he said. Sophia looked up. "Captain says good morning." "Good morning, Captain." Adrian said it without hesitation, and Elena filed that away. The way he knew exactly how to answer that, the way it was automatic. Like he'd been doing it for years. Because he had. Because underneath everything else, he knew his daughter. He looked at Elena then. His eyes went to the eggs, then to her face. "You were up early," he said. "So were you." A pause. The meeting ran long. "I noticed." Something moved in his jaw. He was trying to decide how much to say. She could see the calculation happening in real time. She turned back to the stove and started making a second plate, because Matteo would be up in 15 minutes and he was going through a phase where he only ate eggs if they were made by Elena and not by the kitchen staff, which had caused an entire separate diplomatic incident with the cook last Tuesday. "Marco Reyes is leaving the household," Adrian said. Elena's hands didn't stop moving. "When?" "End of the week." "Does he know that?" A beat. "He will." She turned around at that. Mr. Reyes had been the household coordinator since before the children were born. She knew that from the staff. He was the one who ran the schedules, managed the security rotations, kept the whole machine of this apartment operating, and apparently he just had a very loud argument with his employer at 6:30 a.m. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Adrian looked at her for a moment. It was the look she'd started to recognize. The one where he was deciding how much truth a question deserved. "No," he said, and walked out of the kitchen. Sophia watched him go. She picked up her fork, looked at her eggs, then looked at Elena. "Grown-up stuff," she said solemnly. "Yeah," Elena said. "Grown-up stuff." Reyes found her that afternoon. She was in the playroom with both children. Matteo was working on a drawing that had started as a dog and evolved into some kind of dragon-dog hybrid that he was taking extremely seriously, and Sophia had constructed an elaborate court proceeding in which Captain the dog was on trial for stealing a sock, with Elena serving as both defense attorney and judge, which Sophia insisted was fair because Captain trusted Elena. Reyes knocked on the open door. He looked different than usual, not the silver-haired composure she'd come to expect. He looked tired. He looked like someone who'd been told something that had rearranged his internal architecture. "Miss Marlowe, a moment." She stepped into the hallway. He pulled the door almost closed behind her. "I'm leaving Friday," he said. No preamble. "I heard." He looked at her steadily. "I want to tell you something before I go. Not as an instruction, as information." "Okay." "There's a man named Dario Ricci." He said the name quietly. "He and Mr. Valenti have a history that goes back 15 years. It's been quiet for a long time. It is no longer quiet." Elena kept her face still. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the only person in this building right now who doesn't have a stake in the outcome." He paused. "And because those children are going to need someone who isn't thinking about anything except them when things get complicated." "Things are already complicated." "They're going to get more so." He held her gaze. "I'm not leaving because I want to. I'm leaving because Adrian believes I failed to manage a situation that I could not have managed with the resources I had. And when Adrian Valenti makes a decision, it stays made." A pause. "He's not wrong, exactly. But he's not entirely right either. The distinction doesn't matter to him." Elena thought about the voices through the study door, the words she'd caught. 11 years. Ricci. Handled. "What does Ricci want?" she asked. Reyes looked at her for a moment. "The same thing everyone wants from a man like Adrian. Leverage, submission, a public sign that he's weaker than they say he is." He straightened, and for a second he was the composed, silver-haired coordinator again, and she could see what he must have looked like in his younger years. Sharper, harder. "Watch the children, watch the staff, and if anything feels wrong, not complicated, not unusual, but wrong in your gut, you tell Adrian directly. Not through the new coordinator, directly." He left before she could ask what the difference was. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she heard Sophia declare from behind the door, "Court is back in session. Captain, how do you plead?" And Elena went back in. The new household coordinator arrived on Saturday. His name was Vincent Caruso, younger than Reyes, maybe 40, with a stillness that felt less like professionalism and more like an animal waiting for something to happen. He shook Elena's hand, and his grip was about 2 seconds too long, and his eyes did a thing she'd seen before in men who made quick, comprehensive assessments of people, cataloging, filing, moving on. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "I've read your file." "I didn't know I had a file, Sit." He smiled. "Everyone in this household has a file." She smiled back. It didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. "Of course," she said. Over the following week, she noticed things, small things that she made herself pay attention to because Reyes had told her to trust her gut, and her gut was talking. The security rotation changed. The men who'd been standing near the elevator, the ones she'd come to recognize, nod to, know by name because she always learned names, were replaced by men she didn't know. Caruso said it was standard protocol after a leadership transition. She nodded and said nothing. The phone in the staff corridor that had been there since she arrived disappeared. She asked one of the kitchen staff about it. The woman looked at her, looked away, said she didn't know. And Matteo stopped sleeping. It was subtle at first. He was quiet in the mornings, more so than usual, eyes shadowed. But by the end of the second week with Caruso in the household, Elena was finding him at 11 p.m. sitting at his bedroom window, looking down at the street 42 floors below. The first time she sat with him without saying anything for a few minutes, looked at the streetlights. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "I don't like it when things change," he said. He said it simply, the way kids state facts, not complaining, just explaining. "I know," she said. "Mr. Reyes was here since before I was born." He paused. "Papa didn't tell me why he left." "Papa doesn't always explain things." "He never explains things." Matteo looked at her. "Do you know why?" "Not exactly. But you have a guess." She looked at him. 6 years old, and he had a guess. She thought about what to give him. Not the whole truth, so the whole truth was for adults who'd chosen to be in this. But something. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "when people are trying to keep you safe, They take away information so you can't worry about it, even when worrying might be appropriate. Matteo thought about that. That seems like it doesn't work. It usually doesn't, she agreed. He looked back at the window. Elena. Yeah. If something bad happened, would you tell me? She didn't answer right away. She looked at the side of his face, the set of his jaw, so much like his father's, the darkness under his eyes. 6 years old and already learning that the adults around him operated with hidden information. Yes, she said. I would tell you what I could, in a way that was honest. He nodded slowly, like he was filing it, like he was adding it to whatever small inventory of trustworthy things he'd built for himself. She put him back to bed and went to her room and sat on the edge of the mattress and thought about Reyes saying when things get complicated. She thought about the changed security staff, the missing phone, Caruso's too long handshake. She thought about the word leverage. And then she made herself sleep because she needed to be sharp in the morning, and worrying at 11:30 p.m. in a room she couldn't leave without a key-coded elevator wasn't going to solve anything. She found Adrian on the roof terrace the following Sunday. She hadn't known there was a roof terrace until she followed the stairwell up on impulse one afternoon when the children were napping and she needed 10 minutes of open air. The terrace was long and narrow, with a view of the city that made you feel like you were standing at the edge of something enormous and indifferent. Adrian was there, standing at the railing with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking, looking north. She almost left. This wasn't a space she'd been invited into. But she was tired of operating on the edges of things and calling it appropriate. Can I ask you something? She said. He turned. He didn't look surprised to see her, which was itself slightly unnerving. You're going to regardless, he said. Is this household less safe than it was 3 weeks ago? He was quiet. I'm not asking for the full picture, she said. I'm asking yes or no, because I'm responsible for 2 children and I need to know what calibration to operate at. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. He set the coffee cup down on the railing. Marginally, he said. What does marginally mean in practical terms? It means the children don't leave the building without me or 2 of my senior security staff. It means you don't take them to the park without advance clearance. It means, he paused, it means things that were theoretical are now less theoretical. What changed? He looked at her steadily. A man I've had an arrangement with for a very long time decided the arrangement was no longer to his benefit. Ricci, she said. Something sharpened in his face. Where did you hear that name? Reyes told me. Before he left. Adrian turned back to the railing. His knuckles were white around the cup he'd already put down. She watched him absorb that, the revelation that Reyes had talked to her, the calculation of what that meant, the decision about what to do with it. Reyes overstepped, he said. Reyes gave me information I needed to protect your children. Reyes involved you in something that I'm already involved. Her voice came out sharper than she meant it to. She reined it back. Mr. Valenti. Adrian. She almost never used his name. It landed differently. She could see it, a small flinch. I have been in this building for 6 weeks. I know which staff member is nervous around Caruso. I know that the security rotation changed. I know that Matteo is awake at 11 p.m. staring out his window because kids absorb everything the adults around them are trying to hide. She paused. You cannot protect them from the feeling that something is wrong by not telling me what's wrong. I need the information to do my job. He was silent for a very long time, long enough that she thought he was simply going to say nothing, that he was going to look at the skyline until she ran out of patience and went back inside. Ricci wants to acquire 2 of my companies, Adrian said. He's trying to manufacture a position where I can't refuse. He has leverage, not financial, personal. A pause. He has documentation of certain activities from years ago, things I cannot dispute. What kind of documentation? The kind that, if it went to certain people, would end things. For me and for this family's security. He said it flatly, like he was reading a damage report. He's not coming after me directly. He's applying pressure through intermediaries. It's a slow process. He's very patient. How long have you had to deal with him? 11 years. Same number she'd heard through the study door. And the arrangement that broke down? I was paying him to stay patient. He's decided patience isn't profitable enough. Elena let that sit. Let the full weight of what he was saying settle in her chest without reacting to it, because she knew reacting would close him back up, and she needed him open right now. Your children are scared, she said, not because they know the details, because they can feel the house holding its breath. Adrian's jaw tightened. I'm aware. Are you? She kept her voice level, not accusatory, factual. Because when Matteo asks me if things are okay and I say grown-up stuff, he looks at me exactly the way he looks at you, like he already knows the answer is more complicated than he's being told, and he's just waiting to be proven right. Something crossed his face. Not the closed, controlled expression she'd learned to expect. Something that got through. Something that looked for just a second like it hurt. I don't know what to tell them, he said. Quiet. Stripped of the tone he usually had. You don't have to tell them everything. You have to tell them enough that they trust you. She paused. There's a difference between protecting your children and disappearing from them. Right now you're doing both simultaneously and it's not working. He looked at her. The city was loud 42 floors below them. Sirens somewhere, wind, the constant low frequency of everything moving. And up here it was just the two of them and the weight of what she'd just said. You say things, he said slowly, that no one else in my life would say to me. Is that a problem? I'm still deciding. While you're deciding, she said, will you have dinner with your children tonight? Not a meal that gets brought to your office. At the table, with them. He picked up his coffee cup, looked at it. Yes, he said. She nodded and went back inside. Dinner was not graceful. Matteo knocked over his water glass and went rigid with alarm in the way he did when he expected a reaction, and Adrian picked up the water glass and handed Matteo extra napkins and said, That happens. And the look on Matteo's face was something Elena had to look away from because it was too much to see head on. The relief in it, the pure animal relief of a child discovering that a spill is just a spill. Sophia talked about Captain the dog's ongoing legal troubles for approximately 22 minutes without stopping. Adrian listened to all of it. After dinner, he read to them. Elena heard it from the hallway. She wasn't trying to listen, she was walking past, but she stopped because she'd never heard him read before. His voice was lower than usual, slower. He got the voices right, the characters, different tones for different characters. He'd done this before. He knew the book. Of course he knew the book. These were his children. She walked away. She went to her room and stood there for a minute with her hand against the wall, feeling something she wasn't ready to name. Everything shifted 4 days later. It was 4:15 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Elena was in the playroom with Sophia. Matteo was doing homework with a tutor in the study when Caruso appeared in the doorway. Miss Marlowe, he said, Mr. Valenti would like to see you. Something about the way he said it, not the words, the arrangement of the words. Too smooth, too careful, like words that had been placed deliberately instead of spoken. Now? She said. Now. She looked at Sophia. I'll be right back. You and Captain hold down the fort. Sophia looked up from her drawing. Her eyes went to Caruso and away again, fast. The same thing Matteo did, looking and looking away, the reflex of children who'd learned not to stare at things that made them uncertain. Okay, Sophia said. She didn't sound okay. Elena followed Caruso down the hall, not toward Adrian's office, toward the east corridor, the one she rarely went down, the one that led to the private elevator that went directly to the building's parking structure. This isn't toward Mr. Valenti's office, she said. He asked to meet downstairs, car arrival. He didn't tell me that. He told me to tell you. She stopped walking. Caruso turned. His face was still doing that animal waiting thing. Let me check with him, she said. She pulled out her phone. Miss Marlowe? She'd already dialed, held it to her ear. It rang once, twice. Elena, Adrian's voice. He'd picked up fast. Caruso says you want to meet me downstairs. A pause. 1 second. maybe less. But she'd been in this building long enough to know what Adrian Valenti sounded like when he was surprised, and she heard it. "I didn't ask Caruso to bring you anywhere," he said. His voice had changed, flattened out, become the voice she had heard through the study door. She looked at Caruso. Caruso looked at her, and the waiting animal's stillness fell away from him all at once, replaced by something entirely different. A decision, made and executed in the same instant, and he reached for her arm. She stepped back. "Adrian?" She heard him shouting something into the phone, heard footsteps, loud and fast, coming from multiple directions at once, heard Caruso say something sharp and low in Italian, and then the hallway was suddenly full of motion and sound, and the careful, constructed reality of the past 6 weeks collapsed like a wall that had been pretending to be solid. Caruso's hand closed around her wrist. She said nothing. She didn't scream. She did the only thing she'd trained herself to do in a classroom full of chaos. She found the center of the room in her mind, stood exactly there, and waited for the shape of the thing to become clear. Adrian came around the corner at the other end of the hall, moving faster than she'd ever seen him move. And behind him, 2 men she did recognize, his actual senior staff, and the look on his face was something she didn't have a word for. Not fear. Something older than fear. Caruso released her wrist and stepped back, and for one suspended second, everyone in the hallway was completely still, and Elena understood, with the absolute clarity of someone who has just had the floor change beneath her, that whatever marginally had meant, whatever careful calibration she'd been operating under, it was finished. The arrangement had broken, and she was standing directly in the middle of whatever came next, 42 floors above the street, with 2 children down the hall who were waiting for her to come back, and no version of this that had an easy exit. Caruso didn't run. That was the thing Elena kept coming back to afterward, that he didn't run, didn't panic, didn't do any of the things a man who'd just been caught does. He stepped back from her, put both hands visible at his sides, and looked at Adrian with an expression that was almost peaceful, like a man who had already made his calculations and found them satisfactory. "It wasn't what it looked like," Caruso said. "Don't." Adrian's voice was barely above a whisper, which was somehow worse than shouting. He had one hand on Elena's arm now, not gripping, just there, the way you put your hand on something to confirm it's solid. "Don't say another word." "Adrian, not another word." The 2 security men behind Adrian had Caruso by the shoulders before Elena fully registered them moving. It happened fast and practiced and without visible effort, the way trained people do physical things, and Caruso let it happen, which told her something she filed immediately. He knew this was coming. He'd known before he put his hand on her wrist. He'd done it anyway. That wasn't panic, that was a message. Adrian turned to her. His face was close and his eyes were doing the things she'd seen once before, not the controlled professional face, not the father-at-dinner face, but something underneath both of those, something raw and working very hard. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." "Your wrist?" "I'm fine." She looked at Caruso, who was standing between the 2 men with the same settled, unhurried expression. "He wanted me to see something downstairs. Or he wanted someone downstairs to see me." Adrian's jaw tightened. He looked at Caruso. "Which one is it?" Caruso said nothing. "Vincent." The name came out like something being cut. "Which one?" Caruso looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at Adrian. "You know which one." Adrian stepped toward him. One of the security men moved slightly. Not to stop Adrian, Elena realized, but to be close in case Adrian did something that needed managing afterward. And she understood then that these men were not afraid of Caruso. They were ready to be afraid of Adrian. "Who sent you?" Adrian said. "You know who sent me." "I want you to say it." Caruso looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not warmly, not triumphantly, just the smile of a man completing a task. "Mr. Ricci sends his regards," he said, "and his terms. You have 72 hours. The hallway went so quiet Elena could hear her own pulse. Adrian stood there for 3 seconds. 4. She watched something move across his face that she didn't have the architecture to fully read. rage, and something beneath the rage. Something that looked like grief, like a man who'd been told a thing he'd been dreading for years and still wasn't ready for it. "Get him out of my building," Adrian said. They put Caruso in a car. Elena didn't ask where the car went. She was sitting in Adrian's office, on the chair she'd sat in on her first day when she'd signed the NDA, and the office felt smaller than it had then. Or maybe she felt larger in it, more present, more implicated. Adrian stood with his back to her for almost 2 full minutes. She let him. When he turned around, he looked like someone who hadn't slept in 3 days, which was probably close to true. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay." "Caruso was not my hire. He came from a recommendation I trusted." He paused. "I trusted it because it came from within my own circle, which means Ricci has someone inside my circle." Elena took that in. "Reyes didn't recommend him." "No. Reyes was removed because Ricci needed Reyes gone." He sat down across from her. "I removed Reyes. Ricci didn't have to. I did it for him." He said this the way people say things they're forcing themselves to say clearly, so there's no ambiguity about what they're confessing to. "I was angry. I thought Reyes had failed to see a threat. The threat was Caruso, and I handed Caruso the keys to my household." Elena looked at her hands, looked at the faint red mark on her wrist where Caruso had grabbed her. It didn't hurt. It was just there. Evidence. "What are Ricci's terms?" she asked. "That's not Adrian." She raised her eyes. "What are the terms?" He held her gaze. She'd noticed he did this when she used his name. He always held her gaze a beat longer, like the name landing in the air between them surprised him slightly every time. "He wants the Harlow Street properties. 14 buildings in Lower Manhattan that I've been developing for the last 6 years. Combined value around $300 million. And he wants my signature on 3 corporate documents that would give his operation legal cover for..." He stopped. "Things I won't sign." "What happens if you don't comply in 72 hours? He was quiet. "Adrian. He releases the documentation he has to federal authorities, to my business partners, to..." He paused again. "To people who would use it against my children." "What kind of documentation?" "Records from 11 years ago, before I made changes to how I operated." He said it flatly. "Things I did that I can't undo. Things that, in the wrong hands, would result in criminal proceedings, and civil suits that would leave Matteo and Sofia with nothing." He looked at her directly. "I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm telling you what we're facing." Elena sat with that, the full weight of it. $300 million or criminal prosecution and 2 children who would lose everything. "He has 72 hours of leverage," she said. "After 72 hours, what happens? He releases it anyway?" "That's the usual pattern." He leaned back, rubbed his face with one hand. "Ricci doesn't believe in burned leverage. He releases it incrementally, enough to pressure, not enough to destroy completely. So I'm always fighting on multiple fronts and never have the ground to fight back from. So it doesn't end with compliance. It never ends with compliance. Compliance just moves the target." Elena nodded slowly. "Then the answer isn't compliance." He looked at her. "I know that." "What's the answer?" "That," he said, "is what the next 72 hours are for." She went back to the children. She didn't have a choice. They were waiting. Sofia had probably been watching the hallway door for the last 20 minutes. And the last thing Elena was going to do was let 2 kids who already had abandonment burned into their nervous system spend an evening wondering where she'd gone. Sofia was at the door to the playroom when Elena came back. She'd been there. Elena could tell because her small face had that particular expression, trying to look casual, pulling it off exactly as well as a 4-year-old can, which is not very well at all. "Captain was worried," Sofia said. "I know, I'm sorry. Tell him I was in a meeting." "He says meetings are boring." "He's right." Elena crouched down. "Come on, we were in the middle of something." Sofia came to her immediately, not running, not dramatically, but closing the distance like she needed to confirm Elena was solid and warm and present. She tucked her small head against Elena's shoulder for just a second. Elena put her hand on the back of Sofia's head and closed her eyes briefly. I'm not going anywhere, she thought. I don't care what Ricci has. I don't care what comes next. I'm not going anywhere. She carried Sophia back into the playroom and started building. At 9 p.m., after both children were asleep, Elena went looking for Adrian. She found him not in his office, but in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a glass of water he wasn't drinking, staring at nothing. The kitchen was empty otherwise, but the staff had cycled out for the evening. The overhead light was too bright, industrial, making the room look like an interrogation space. I've been thinking, she said. He turned. He looked exhausted in the bone-deep way that sleep doesn't fix. Tell me about the man inside your circle, she said, the one who recommended Caruso. Why? Because that's the thread. Ricci's leverage depends on Caruso having access and on whatever documentation he has staying in his control. If you can find the inside person, you know the shape of his network inside your operation. She pulled out one of the kitchen stools and sat. You said you've been watching Ricci for 11 years. Watching, not neutralizing. Why not? He looked at her for a moment. Because dismantling someone like Ricci isn't a single action. It's a process. You remove his financial base, you remove his protection, you remove his information advantage. It takes time and clean hands and... He stopped. And I don't have completely clean hands, which he knows. But you know things about him. Considerable things. Things that federal authorities would find interesting. The pause that followed was long enough to tell her she'd hit something real. I have been building a case, he said carefully, for several years. Documentation of my own. It's not complete. Elena looked at him. How incomplete? 60%? Maybe 65. What's missing? Financial trail. His money moves through 3 shell entities I can identify, and at least 2 I can't. Without the full trail, it's circumstantial. A good defense attorney buries it. Elena thought about this. 65% in 72 hours. Elena, is it possible? He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not dismissal, but something more complicated, like a man recalculating a problem he'd already written off. With the right access to his financial records, possibly. But his records are held where? Multiple servers. One domestic, one offshore, one... He stopped, set down the water glass. You're not a financial investigator. No, but I know what questions to ask, and I have a very clear reason to want this finished. She held his gaze. I'm not going to sit in this building and wait for Ricci to set the agenda. Your children are upstairs and they felt this building holding its breath tonight, even though no one told them anything. That can't be the rest of their childhood. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. There's a man, he said slowly. Thomas Crane. He worked for Ricci's financial operation 6 years ago. He left, not cleanly. He has information that could complete the trail, but he's been underground since because Ricci doesn't let people leave cleanly and stay comfortable. A pause. I've had his approximate location for 8 months. Approximate. Philadelphia. Maybe. He moves. And you haven't moved on it because bringing Crane into the open exposes him to Ricci, and I wasn't ready to move against Ricci completely, and I wasn't willing to burn a man as a tactical piece before I could guarantee the outcome. He said this like a man who'd had this internal argument many times. If I go to Crane now, with 72 hours on the clock, I'm rushing. Rushed operations fail. But rushed operations are sometimes the only operations available, Elena said. He looked at her for a very long time. She didn't look away. I need to make some calls, he said. I'll make coffee, she said. What happened next happened in a kind of compressed, sleepless time that Elena would later struggle to reconstruct in sequence. Adrian made calls. She heard pieces of them. Not the content, just the tone, the cadence of someone working a network with precision, pulling threads. She made coffee and brought it to the office door and left it there. She went back to the children's hallway and stood outside their doors for a few minutes, listening to them sleep. At 1:30 a.m., Adrian appeared in the kitchen doorway and said, "We have a location." "For Crane?" "Yes, he's in Philadelphia. He'll talk. He's been waiting for someone to give him a reason. Elena felt something release in her chest that she hadn't realized was clenched. When do we? I leave at 5 a.m. You stay here. He said it quickly, heading off the thing he could see forming in her expression. The children need you here. Caruso's gone, but I'm replacing the full security team tonight. Crane's location is… The situation there is… He paused. It's not safe for someone who doesn't need to be there. She wanted to argue. She swallowed it. He was right about the children. What do I tell Mateo if he asks where you are? She said. Adrian was quiet for a second. Tell him I'm handling something. Tell him I'll be back. He's heard that before. I know. A pause. Tell him I'll be back and I mean it. He'll know the difference. She nodded. Be careful. He looked at her. That searching look again, the one she never quite knew how to hold. I'm always careful, he said. That's clearly been working out great, she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. He left. She slept 3 hours, got up at 5:10 and heard the elevator descending, stood in her room with her hand on the wall and thought about 65% of a case becoming 100% or not, about a man in Philadelphia who'd been hiding for 6 years and now had to decide whether coming into the light was worth what it would cost him. She thought about Ricci's 72 hours ticking. She made breakfast for 2 children who asked where their father was with the careful, measured tone of children who had learned to ask that question without expecting a satisfying answer. He's handling something, Elena said. He'll be back. Mateo looked at her. She held his gaze. He said he'd be back and he means it, she said. He told me to tell you that specifically. Mateo was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he picked up his fork. Okay, he said, not convinced, but choosing to be. She thought, Adrian, you better come back. Not a prayer, a demand. She aimed it at the general direction of the elevator shaft. 41 hours into the 72, Adrian came back. She knew something was wrong before he said anything. She'd learned to read the quality of his silences. This one was different. He came through the private elevator with one of his men, and his man's face was completely still in the way faces go still when they're keeping something contained, and Adrian sat down in the kitchen chair and put both hands flat on the table and stared at them. Elena stood across from him, waited. Crane talked, Adrian said. And? And it's worse than 65%. He looked up. He had records I didn't know existed, complete financial trail, all 3 shell companies and the 2 I couldn't identify, wire transfers, dates, names. He paused. It's a complete case. Enough to end Ricci. Elena waited for the but. She could hear it in the architecture of what he was saying. But, Adrian said, Crane also had something else, something I didn't ask for and wasn't prepared for. He looked at her, and his face was doing something she'd never seen on it. Not just exhaustion, not just anger. Something that looked like the specific devastation of finding out you were wrong about something you were certain of. The documentation Ricci has been holding over me for 11 years, yes. It's not just records of my activities. His voice was completely flat now, stripped to the frame. It includes records that were manufactured. 11 years ago, Ricci had someone inside my legal team create documents that don't reflect things I actually did. They reflect things designed to appear that I did, things significantly more severe than what I was actually involved in. He stopped. Ricci didn't just collect leverage on me. He built additional leverage from scratch. And the man who built it… He stopped again. Elena felt something cold move through her. Who was it? Adrian set his jaw. His name is Ferris, Marco Reyes's predecessor. He died 4 years ago. Natural causes. A pause. Which is extremely convenient. So the documentation, part of it is real, part of it is fabricated, and they're interwoven so precisely that separating them requires… He stopped. Crane showed me the construction. It's sophisticated. Ricci has been holding a weapon over me that is half real and half invented, and I have spent 11 years conducting myself as if the entire weapon were real, limiting every move I made, every action I considered, because I thought the full case against me was legitimate. The kitchen was very quiet. Elena sat down. She thought about 11 years of a man moving carefully, hedging, restraining himself, building a case slowly because he believed himself to be more exposed than he was. She thought about his wife. She thought about the documentation he'd said was connected to her death. "The part about your wife," she said quietly. Adrian's face went absolutely still. "What about her?" "You said Ricci's documentation included things connected to her death." "Yes." "Was that—" She hesitated. "Was that part of the real documentation or the fabricated?" The silence lasted long enough that she could hear the refrigerator hum and a distant siren 42 floors below. "I don't know," Adrian said. "Crane didn't have full visibility into that specific file." He looked at his hands. "He thinks fabricated. He's not certain." Elena closed her eyes for 1 second, opened them. "Okay." "Okay," he repeated like the word didn't make sense in this context. "We have a complete financial trail on Ricci. We have enough to move." She kept her voice level because someone in this room needed to be level, and she could see that right now it had to be her. The fabricated documentation, if it goes to federal authorities at the same time as the complete case against Ricci, your legal team can challenge it. The manufactured origin can be demonstrated. Maybe. Probably. "Elena, Ricci built a weapon that's half fake," she said. "That means the real weapon is smaller than you thought, and you've been defending yourself against the fake half for 11 years. She leaned forward. "Stop defending. Go forward." Adrian looked at her for a long time. She couldn't tell what was moving behind his eyes. Grief, calculation, something that had been held in containment for a very long time and was now pressing against the walls. "There's a timing issue," he said. "How long?" "Ricci's deadline is 31 hours from now. The federal filing process, even expedited, is—" "How long?" 48 to 72 hours minimum before anything is formally in motion, and I have protection from the submission." Elena did the math. "So we're 17 hours short." "Yes." "What does Ricci do when his deadline passes without compliance?" "He makes a call to my primary financial partners. He leaks the first layer of documentation. My partners pull their commitments. 3 of my legitimate operations go into crisis simultaneously." Adrian said it like a man reciting damage estimates. "And then the second layer, and then it escalates in stages over the following week." "His operation is exposed if he does that." "Not immediately. He's careful about what's traceable back to him." A pause. "He has a buffer of 2 or 3 moves before anything touches him." Elena stared at the table. She thought about 17 hours. She thought about Matteo sleeping down the hall, Sophia's arms around Captain, the way this household had started to breathe again over the past 6 weeks. She thought about what Reyes had told her. When things get complicated. This was not complicated. This was simple, actually. Simple and brutal and clear. Ricci had 17 hours on them. Ricci was going to use them. And whatever happened in those 17 hours was going to determine whether the thing she'd been building in this household, the fragile, imperfect, real thing, survived or got demolished. She looked at Adrian. "Who is the inside person?" she said. "The one who recommended Caruso." "I have a strong suspicion, not certainty." "Name." "Elena, name." He looked at her. His voice was very quiet when he said it. "Daniel Park. He's been my corporate attorney for 7 years." "Your attorney?" "Yes." "Does he know you suspect him?" "I don't know." "Does he have access to your financial systems?" "Partial." "Enough." Elena nodded. "Then we have one option that gets us 17 hours. She held Adrian's gaze. "Park thinks he's inside. He thinks he's managing information flow for Ricci, which means we can use that." She paused. "Let him send Ricci a message, the right message. Something that buys time." Adrian was very still. "What kind of message?" "The kind that makes Ricci believe compliance is coming." She paused. "And while Ricci waits for compliance, you file." Adrian stared at her. She could see him working through it, the angles, the risks, the places it could collapse. "If Park is the leak, and we use him deliberately, we're running a deception on Ricci with a man who is also deceiving us," he said. "If Park realizes what we're doing, he tells Ricci immediately. Then we make sure Park doesn't realize what we're doing." She looked at him steadily. "You're telling me you've been watching Ricci for 11 years. Have you ever hit him back?" "Not directly." "Then he doesn't know how you hit." She leaned forward. Use that. Something changed in Adrian's face. Not the devastated thing, something older, harder, the thing that had kept him in this world for 11 years and running. He looked at her like he was seeing her from a slightly different angle than he had before. You understand what you're describing, he said. You understand that if this goes wrong, I understand exactly what I'm describing. She didn't look away. I'm not asking you to protect me from the consequence. I'm asking you to decide whether you're going to fight or wait for the building to fall. Adrian was quiet. The kitchen hum, the distant city. His hands flat on the table, still, and then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension in them changed, not relaxed, resolved. I need 2 hours, he said. I'll be here, Elena said. She meant it in every sense she had. The 2 hours became 3. She sat in the kitchen and drank coffee she didn't need and thought about Park. 7 years, corporate attorney, Ricci's man embedded in Adrian's closest circle. She thought about what it took to maintain a deception that long, the daily small betrayals, the information passed, the positions subtly shifted. She thought about whether Park had a family, then made herself stop thinking about that because it wasn't relevant and compassion was not what the next 17 hours required. At 2:20 a.m., she heard Adrian's voice from the office. One sentence delivered quietly, and then a long silence. And then another sentence, and then the office door opened. Adrian came to the kitchen doorway. His face was resolved in the way hers probably was. Not calm, not confident, but past the point of reversal. Park sent the message, he said. Elena put down her cup. And? Ricci's people confirmed receipt. He's extending the deadline by 24 hours. He paused. He thinks I'm capitulating. He thinks Park talked me into seeing reason. 24 hours, she said. More than enough. He looked at her for a moment. The filing goes in at 8 a.m. when the relevant office opens. By the time Ricci realizes what's happening, he stopped. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something in his face went wrong. She saw it happen, saw the moment the resolution cracked. What? She said. He turned the phone toward her. It was a photograph. The photograph was of this building, their building, taken from street level. And standing on the sidewalk in the photograph, small and clear, identifiable, were 2 children in school uniforms she recognized. Matteo and Sofia, taken today. During the afternoon walk she'd taken them on, the walk she'd cleared through the new security team, the walk that was supposed to have been protected, watched, safe. Beneath the photograph, 4 words. Your deadline stands. Choose. Elena looked at the photograph for a long moment. At Matteo's profile, his head turning to look at something. At Sofia holding Captain in the crook of one arm. The photograph had been taken from across the street, close enough to be detail clear. Which meant someone had been close enough. Which meant the new security team had a problem. Or was a problem. She looked up at Adrian. His face had gone to something she'd never seen on it. Not rage, not calculation, something that lived below both of those. The thing that lives in a parent when the line between my world and my children disappears. They're asleep, she said. Her voice was even. She made it even. They're upstairs. They're safe. And Ricci just showed you his real move because he's scared of losing control of the situation. She held his gaze. He's not going to touch them. That photograph is a performance. If he touched them, he loses every negotiating position he has. You don't know that, Adrian said. His voice was barely audible. I know that you are not going to let that photograph make you irrational, she said. Because irrational is exactly what he needs you to be right now. He's running out of time, and he knows it, and he's telling you he has access to your children to make you panic and sign things before 8 a.m. Adrian stared at her. The 8 a.m. filing happens, she said, and right now, tonight, we fix the security team. She didn't look away from him. Not for a second. You don't have the option of falling apart. Your children are asleep down that hall, and they need you to hold it together for the next 5 hours. The silence stretched. Then Adrian said very quietly, check on them. She went. She walked down the hallway and opened Matteo's door first. He was asleep on his side, one arm off the edge of the bed, the way he always slept, breathing slow and steady. She stood there for 5 seconds and then closed the door gently and went to Sophia's room. Sophia was asleep with Captain tucked under her chin, her small face completely slack, no worry in it. The perfect unconscious trust of a child who had decided somewhere in the past 6 weeks that the world was safe enough to let go of while she slept. Elena stood in the doorway. She felt something move through her that started in her chest and went all the way down. Not fear, not exactly. Something harder than fear. Something that didn't have a gentle name. She was not going to let Ricci inside this apartment. She was not going to let him reach these children. She was not going to let 6 weeks of careful, difficult, real trust get destroyed by a man who used children in photographs as leverage. She went back to the kitchen. "They're fine," she said. Adrian was on the phone. Already working, she could hear it in the clipped precision of his voice. He looked at her and nodded once, and she nodded back, and that was all the communication they needed right now, because the next 5 hours were going to require everything both of them had. And the next 5 hours required everything both of them had, and they burned through them like fuel. Adrian worked the phones, Elena worked the building. She didn't have security clearance, didn't have a weapon, didn't have anything except 7 years of teaching experience that had trained her to read a room in under 4 seconds and identify the thing that didn't belong. She walked every corridor of the 42nd floor starting at 2:40 a.m., systematic, quiet, her socks making no sound on the marble. She looked at the men posted at each station. The new security team, the one that had replaced the familiar faces after Caruso's removal. And she looked at them the way she'd learned to look at substitute teachers in her classroom. Which one is trying too hard? Which one is looking at the wrong thing? Which one's hands are wrong? There were 11 men on overnight rotation. 3 of them had been on staff for more than 2 months. She knew their faces, knew their habits. She trusted those 3 the same way she trusted anything in this building, which was carefully and provisionally. The other 8 were newer. Most of them read fine. The particular species of professional stillness that Adrian's people had. The way they held themselves like men who had decided that their bodies were tools and tools don't fidget. But one of them was wrong. She walked past him twice to be sure. He was posted near the service corridor, the one that ran behind the kitchen toward the freight elevator. He was doing everything correctly. Posture, position, eyes scanning the right angles. But every 40 seconds he checked his left wrist, and he wasn't wearing a watch. She went back to the kitchen and waited 4 minutes. Then she walked past again. Left wrist, 40 seconds. She went to Adrian. He was at his desk. 2 phones, a laptop, a legal pad covered in handwriting she couldn't read from the door. He looked up when she appeared, and his face asked the question without his mouth opening. "Service corridor," she said quietly. "Man posted there. No watch, checks his wrist every 40 seconds. He's waiting for a signal. We're counting something down." Adrian was out of his chair before she finished the sentence. He said one word into the nearest phone, a name, Santos. And 2 minutes later, 2 of the 3 men she trusted were escorting the wrong man off the floor. The wrong man said nothing as they walked him out. He looked at Elena once as he passed the kitchen doorway. It wasn't threatening. It was almost impressed. She turned back to the coffee maker. Her hands were shaking slightly. She made herself watch them shake and then made herself breathe until they stopped, because shaking hands were not a luxury she had time for. Holtz. At 4:15 a.m., Adrian came to the kitchen. "Filing is staged," he said. "Everything Crane gave us plus our documentation. It goes at 8:03 a.m. to 3 separate offices simultaneously, Federal, State Attorney General, and the Financial Crimes Unit. The redundancy means Ricci can't kill it by pressuring one contact." He sat down across from her. "Park has been contained." "Contained how?" "He's in a room on the 38th floor with 2 of my men and no phone. He'll stay there until the filings are confirmed." He said it without inflection. "He won't be harmed." "I wasn't asking that." "I know, I'm telling you anyway." He looked at her across the table. He looked, she thought, like a man who'd been awake for 22 hours and had run a full marathon somewhere in the middle of that. His collar was open, the jacket gone somewhere, and there was a tiredness in him that was different from the guarded exhaustion she'd seen before. Rawer. Less managed. "You found the man in the service corridor?" "Yes." "My security team didn't." "Your security team was looking for weapons and unusual movement. I was looking for a nervous habit." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. different skill set. He looked at her for a moment. Why aren't you more afraid? She thought about it honestly. I am afraid, she said. I've been afraid since Caruso grabbed my wrist. I'm afraid right now. She paused. But being afraid doesn't... I don't know how to explain this. Being afraid has never made me leave a room that needed me in it. He was quiet for a moment. My wife was afraid, he said. It came out like something he hadn't planned to say, like it escaped the cage he kept it in. He caught himself, and she watched him decide. She could actually see the decision, to keep going instead of pulling it back. She was afraid for years. She told me the life I'd built was going to cost us something we couldn't afford to lose. I told her I had it managed. He looked at his hands. I didn't. What happened to her? A man I'd had a dispute with. He wanted to send a message. She was driving home from a gallery. She liked art. She went every week. It was the one thing that was completely separate from my world. He stopped. Her car was forced off the road. They meant to shake her up, send a message. It went further than they planned. He said this last part with a flatness that Elena recognized. The flatness of a sentence that's been said so many times internally, so many times in the dark, that the emotion has been worn away and what's left is just the shape of it. The man responsible is dead. He died before I found out the full extent of what Ricci's documentation claims about my involvement in the incident. He looked up. I didn't arrange it. I need you to know that. Whatever Ricci's files suggest, I didn't arrange her death. She was my... He stopped. I know, Elena said. You don't... I know, she said again, more firmly. Adrian, I know. He looked at her. Something in his face moved. Not collapsing, nothing as clean as that, but something giving way like ice shifting. He nodded, once, and looked back at the table. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Not the heavy silence of things unsaid. The different kind. The silence of people who have just said something real and are letting it exist. 3 hours and 45 minutes, Elena said finally. Yes. Then we wait. Then we wait, he said. She checked on the children at 5 a.m., still sleeping. She stood in each doorway for exactly as long as she needed to, and then went back to her post in the kitchen, which was what it had become. Her post, her station, the place where she could hear both the office and the hallway and the elevator simultaneously. At 6:30, Matteo appeared. He padded into the kitchen in his pajamas with his hair flattened on one side and looked at Elena and then at the state of the kitchen. The coffee cups, the legal pad she'd pulled toward herself at some point and covered in notes she couldn't fully explain. The general atmosphere of a room that had been used as a command center all night. And his 6-year-old face processed all of it. You didn't sleep, he said. I slept a little. She hadn't. You're up early. I woke up. He climbed onto his stool. He looked at her carefully. Is today a bad day or a good day? She looked at the clock. 6:32 a.m., 89 minutes. Today, she said, is the day things start getting better. He studied her face to see if she meant it. She held steady under the study because she did mean it. She believed it with the specific ferocity of someone who had helped build something and was not prepared to watch it burn. Okay, he said. Can I have eggs? She made him eggs. Il pochet. At 7:45 a.m., Adrian came to the kitchen doorway. He was in a different shirt. He must have changed at some point, though she hadn't seen it, and his face had the compressed look of a man 15 minutes from a thing he'd been moving toward for 11 years. He looked at Matteo eating eggs. Matteo looked up. Morning, Matteo said. Morning. Adrian came into the kitchen and sat next to his son and stole a piece of Matteo's toast without asking, which was something Elena had never seen him do, and Matteo looked at the stolen toast and then at his father and said, Hey, and Adrian said, I was hungry. And Matteo's face did something extraordinary. It laughed. It just laughed, quick and surprised and real, and Adrian's face answered it in the way Elena had been watching happen slowly for 6 weeks, the way a man's face answers his child's laugh when he lets it. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. 8:03. Confirmed. All three. R. She looked at Adrian over Matteo's head. He was already looking at her. He'd felt the phone buzz from where he was sitting. She could see it. The way his shoulders changed, the specific quality of his stillness in that moment. She turned the phone toward him. He read it. He looked up. She nodded. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. Matteo was eating his eggs and talking about something. Captain's ongoing legal saga. Something about a second trial. Sophia was going to be very upset when she woke up and found out the justice system in this household was apparently deeply flawed. And Adrian opened his eyes and looked at his son, and for a moment his face was just open. Not managed, not constructed. Just a father looking at his kid and being present in it. Elena turned back to the stove. She was not going to cry in this kitchen. She had made herself a firm promise about that. Dad. At 8:47 a.m., Adrian's primary phone rang. He took the call in the hallway. She could hear the tone of it from the kitchen. 2 voices, one being Adrian's, one being someone delivering information at speed. It lasted 4 minutes. When he came back, his face was resolved in a new way. Not the compressed pre-803 face, but something that had moved past a gate. Ricci's attorney called my attorney, he said. He kept his voice low. Matteo had drifted toward the playroom. They're aware of the filings. They're demanding a conversation. What did your attorney say? That Mr. Valenti has no comment at this time. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, which is attorney language for go to hell. How long before Ricci makes his next move? He'll try to suppress the filings first. He has contacts. He'll call them. But 3 simultaneous submissions with full documentation and chain of custody. He shook his head. It's not suppressible. He knows that. He's buying time to think. A pause. And then he'll do something else. Elena had been waiting for that sentence. What's the something else? I don't know yet. That's what concerns me. It concerned her, too. She looked at the clock, 8:51. The filings were in. Ricci knew. And now there was a man who'd spent 11 years being patient and careful and calculated, who had just discovered that the game had changed while he was waiting for his deadline to mature. Patient, careful, calculated men were the dangerous kind when they got desperate. The children don't go out today, she said. Agreed. And you don't go out today either. He looked at her. That's not... Adrian. She held his gaze. You are not going somewhere today. Whatever Ricci's next move is, it will happen faster if you're outside this building and he knows where you are. He didn't argue, which told her he'd already made the same calculation. There's a meeting I need to take in person. My legal team. Bring them here. A pause. People don't usually tell me what to do. People who care about whether you survive the day do, she said. He looked at her for a moment, then, I'll have them come here. He pulled out his phone, stopped, looked at her again, differently. Elena? She waited. When this is over, he stopped, started again. I need you to understand that what you've done in the past 6 weeks, what you've done in the past 6 hours, is not something I expected. And it's not something I know how to adequately... Don't, she said. He looked at her. Not right now, she said. When it's over. Say it when it's over. She looked at him steadily. Because it's not over. He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded, then made the call. The legal team arrived at 10. 3 attorneys, 1 investigative accountant, 1 woman who was introduced as a federal liaison and who looked at everything in the apartment with the particular attentiveness of someone professionally trained to notice things, which made 2 of them in the room. They took over the dining table. Elena kept the children in the playroom with a construction project she'd been saving, $40 of balsa wood and craft supplies that she'd ordered online 2 weeks ago for a rainy day, which she had not anticipated being this specific kind of rainy. She set Matteo and Sophia up with the project, explained that they were building a bridge, and that the bridge had to hold the combined weight of every stuffed animal Captain could assemble in his regiment. Sophia took this extremely seriously. Matteo took the engineering aspects extremely seriously. Elena sat with them and handed materials and helped with the structural questions and kept one ear tuned to the hallway. At 11:30, one of the attorneys knocked on the playroom door and asked if she could speak with Elena for a moment. Her name was Catherine Voss, late 40s, efficient, the kind of woman who gave you the impression that she had already identified every exit in the room before she sat down in it. "Mr. Valenti told us about your role last night," Voss said, standing in the hallway, identifying the man in the service corridor. "The Ricci communication strategy." "Okay," Elena said. "I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer." Voss looked at her directly. "Do you have any direct communication with anyone outside this household that could be a liability? Family member, friend, former colleague who might be reachable?" Elena's stomach tightened. "My mother. She's in Queens." Voss nodded. "Is she aware of the household situation?" "She knows I work here. She doesn't know specifics." "Has Ricci's people made contact with her? Or, well, no. I would know." She paused. "I call her every day." "When did you last call her?" Elena counted backward. The past 22 hours had been yesterday afternoon, before everything last night. Voss was already on her phone. She spoke quietly for 30 seconds, then looked at Elena. "We're going to put a car outside her building. Standard precaution." Elena felt the tightening in her stomach become something else, colder and more specific. "Is she at risk?" "We don't believe so, but Ricci's playbook when a position collapses is to apply pressure on peripheral contacts." Voss said it without softening. "We're being careful." Elena looked at the playroom door. Behind it, she could hear Sophia instructing Matteo on the structural requirements of Captain's Bridge, which apparently needed a ceremonial arch. "Thank you," Elena said. She went back into the playroom. She picked up a piece of balsa wood and handed it to Matteo and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the children needed to hear. She called her mother at 11:45 from the hallway, out of the children's earshot. Ruth picked up on the second ring. "You didn't call this morning." "I know. I'm sorry. Busy night." "Are you all right?" "Yes." She kept her voice steady. "There are going to be some people outside your building today. From my employer. Just don't be alarmed." A pause. "Elena." "Mom." "Tell me the truth." Elena leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes for 2 seconds. "Things are complicated right now. They're being handled. You are not in any danger. But I wanted you to know about the people outside so you didn't worry." "I am currently extremely worried." "I know. I'm sorry." She opened her eyes. "I will call you tonight. Everything will be clearer by tonight." Another pause. "You sound like your father when he was trying not to scare me. Is that bad?" "Your father was usually right," Ruth said, "and usually insufferable about it afterward." Elena felt something that was adjacent to a laugh. "I'll call tonight. I love you." "Love you." "Elena, whatever this is, come home after." "I will," she said. She meant that too. Noon. The legal team was still at the dining table. Adrian was with them. Elena made sandwiches because someone had to make sandwiches, and the kitchen staff hadn't come in. Adrian had sent them home that morning without explanation, which the lead cook had accepted with the particular resignation of someone who'd worked in this household long enough to understand that sometimes this was how days went. She made 12 sandwiches and brought them in on a tray and set them in the middle of the table and left without speaking, and Catherine Voss said, "Thank you," without looking up from her documents, and one of the other attorneys took 3 sandwiches simultaneously, which told Elena he'd also been up all night. At 12:40, Adrian's personal phone rang. He looked at the screen. He said, "Everyone stop," to the table and picked up. Elena was in the kitchen. She heard his voice, not words, just the tone. And it was wrong. It was the tone of a man receiving information that has just changed the coordinates of something. She was at the dining room doorway in 6 steps. Adrian was standing. The call lasted 45 seconds. When he ended it, his face was... She had to look at it twice to read it, because it was several things simultaneously. The controlled exterior, and underneath that something that was very close to fury, and underneath that something that looked briefly, terrifyingly, like fear. "That was Ricci," he said. The room went quiet. He called directly. Adrian set the phone down precisely in the center of the table. He's not going to contest the filings. Voss straightened. He said he accepts that the legal situation has changed. He said he wants a conversation, a face-to-face, today. His voice was completely flat. He stopped, picked it back up. He said if I don't come to him today, he's going to take a different kind of action. Different how? Voss said. Adrian looked at Elena when he answered. He looked directly at her, and his face was reading her response before he said the words, which told her what the words were going to be before he said them, and she felt the cold thing from that morning move back through her chest. He said the children are vulnerable, Adrian said. He said I should consider how many places they exist in the world outside this building. Schools, medical records, public spaces. He paused. He said that legal filings don't protect people. They just rearrange who's angry. Elena heard her own breathing. He's bluffing, Voss said immediately. He touches children, and I know what he is, Adrian said, still looking at Elena. He's a man who has just lost his primary leverage and is looking for new leverage, and my children are the most visible vulnerability I have. The room was very loud in its silence. Elena thought about the photograph from last night. The street-level shot, clear and deliberate. Matteo's profile. Sophia with Captain. She thought about someone having that shot in their possession, choosing to send it, choosing those particular children as the image in that message. She thought about the nanny job she'd taken at 3 a.m. 6 weeks ago, because the number at the bottom of an ad had meant she could save her mother's house. She thought about Matteo asking, "Are you going to leave?" and herself saying, "I'm not planning on it." She thought about Sophia's arms around Captain the dog. She thought about the man Ricci was, the patience of him, 11 years of it, the willingness to manufacture documentation, to place Caruso inside their household, to take a photograph of 2 small children as a negotiating tool. And she felt something happen in her that wasn't exactly rage and wasn't exactly resolve, but was something that lived between those 2 things and had no word she knew for it. She looked at Adrian. "You're not going to him," she said. "Elena, you're not." Her voice was quiet, but it had a quality that cut through the room in a way that made Voss look up. Meeting him on his terms, at his location, with his people, today, after the filings, but before any protection is formally in place, is exactly what he wants. You walk in there, and you don't walk back out. If you don't go, he uses the children as the next pressure point. I know. She held his gaze. Which means the children can't be here. The room went very still. I'm listening, Adrian said. Move them. Tonight. Before dark. Somewhere Ricci doesn't know about. Somewhere that isn't connected to your name or your operations or anyone in this building. She was thinking as she was saying it, building it in real time, which was either genius or catastrophic, and she didn't have the time to determine which. How many places do you have that are completely off the operational map? 2. One in New Jersey, one upstate. Which one is more isolated? Upstate. Then that's where they go. She paused. With me? Adrian stared at her. You handle Ricci here, she said. Your team, your lawyers, the filings, the pressure, that's your fight, and you know how to fight it. But you can't do it if you're managing 2 terrified children, and you can't do it if Ricci has them as an active card. She kept her voice even, because if she let it become emotional, she'd lose the room, and she couldn't afford to lose the room. Take the card off the table, Voss said carefully. If Ricci finds out where they've been moved, he won't, Elena said, because the only people who know are in this room. And the transport team. Minimum. 2 of the 3 I trust on this floor. Nobody else knows the destination until we're in the car. She looked at Adrian. Tonight, before dark. How long to arrange it? Adrian was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not resistance, something past resistance, something that was working through multiple calculations simultaneously and arriving at the same place she had. 4 hours, he said. Then we have 4 hours. She moved toward the hallway. I'm going to go tell the children to pack a bag without scaring them. They're 6 and 4. Packing a bag is going to become an adventure, or it's going to become a crisis, and I need to get ahead of that. She stopped at the doorway. Voss, is my mother's building covered? Cars in place, Voss said. Thank you. Elena looked at Adrian one more time. 4 hours. She went back to the playroom. Sophia had constructed what appeared to be the world's most structurally ambitious bridge from balsa wood and craft tape, and Captain the dog was already positioned in the center of it as a test load. Matteo was examining it with the critical eye of someone who had developed genuine engineering opinions in the last 90 minutes. Update, Sophia said without looking up. The bridge holds Captain. We're testing whether it holds Captain and his deputy. Who's his deputy? Sophia held up a small stuffed rabbit Elena had never seen before, which was apparently part of Captain's military command structure. Great news, Elena said, sitting down. We're going on a trip. Sophia looked up fast. Matteo went still in the way he went still. Elena kept her voice easy, warm, the voice she used for transitions that needed to not become events. An adventure. Your dad needs us to go somewhere fun while he handles some boring adult paperwork. There's a house upstate. I've heard... She hadn't heard anything. She was constructing this in real time. That there's a really good creek nearby, and possibly some excellent bridge testing conditions. Matteo looked at her. Is Papa coming? He'll come when the paperwork is done. She held his gaze. He's going to be right here, and we're going to be safe, and it's temporary. Matteo held the gaze back. He was doing the thing he'd done on the first day. The weighing, the inventory of trustworthy things. Is it bad paperwork? He said. It's complicated paperwork, she said. The kind that takes a day or two to sort out. We've all had complicated homework. He thought about this. Okay, he said, and went back to examining the bridge. Elena exhaled slowly. Can Captain come? Sophia said. Captain is mission critical, Elena said. He absolutely comes. Wab. The 4 hours were the longest 4 hours Elena had ever moved through. She packed her own bag in 11 minutes. She helped the children pack theirs in 40. Sophia's packing process involved consulting Captain about each item, which added significant time but was non-negotiable. She checked the hallway twice. She ate half a sandwich standing at the kitchen counter. She called her mother again, briefly, and said tonight, I'll explain tonight. And Ruth said, okay, in the voice she used when she had more questions than the situation would allow. At 4:15 p.m., Adrian came to the playroom doorway. He looked at the children, at their packed bags by the wall, at Sophia holding Captain, at Matteo standing with his arms at his sides in the posture he used when he was scared but was trying not to show it. Adrian looked at them for a moment before he spoke, and Elena saw something in his face that she thought was probably the hardest thing about being the parent he was trying to become. Knowing that the reason your children were afraid was you, the world you'd built, the choices you'd made before they were old enough to have any say in it. He crouched down to their level. He did it without hesitation, which 6 weeks ago she wasn't sure he would have. I need you to go with Elena for a couple of days, he said. I have something to finish here. When I'm done, I'll come get you. Sophia looked at him. Promise? Promise. He said it without the calculation she'd seen him apply to adult conversations. He said it the way you only say something when you mean it all the way down. You're going to go look at a creek. It's supposed to be good for bridge testing operations. Sophia looked at Elena. He knows about the bridge. He's been informed, Elena said. Sophia looked back at her father. Captain's deputy is coming. Good. Adrian reached out and put his hand briefly on Sophia's head, and Sophia leaned into it the way she did. Quick, instinctive, a child claiming what she'd been afraid for too long to ask for. Then he looked at Matteo. Matteo was watching him. I'll be there, Adrian said. 2 days, maybe less. Okay, Matteo said, still watching. I know that word doesn't mean as much as it should right now, Adrian said. I'm going to fix that. He said it directly, looking at his son like his son was a person and not a child to be managed around. I'm going to fix a lot of things, but I need you to go with Elena first. Matteo looked at his father for a long moment. Then he picked up his bag. Come on, Sophia, he said. Let's go. The car left at 4:40 p.m. Two men Elena trusted, an unmarked vehicle, a route that Voss had mapped using GPS block navigation. The children were in the back seat, Sophia immediately establishing captain's seniority over the seating arrangement. Matteo looking out the window at Manhattan receding behind them with an expression she couldn't read. Elena sat between them. She looked back at the building once, through the rear window, as the car moved uptown. It was a building like other buildings from this distance. Glass and steel and height. Anonymous. She thought about Adrian in there. The meetings and the calls and the thing that was coming, because something was still coming. She could feel the shape of it even at a distance. She thought about Ricci. She thought about a man who had just watched 11 years of leverage walk out of his hands. She thought about what desperate men did with 2 days. Her phone buzzed. Adrian. One message, no context, the kind of text that was a whole conversation compressed. I have him. She stared at the message. Have him how, she typed back. 3 dots. Then, Park talked. More than we expected. Ricci has a partner, federal contact who's been managing the suppression end for 8 years. Name, evidence, all of it. Voss says it's enough to guarantee protection before the end of the day. Elena read it twice. She looked at the back of the driver's head. She looked at Sophia, who had fallen asleep with Captain under her chin in the specific, instantaneous way of young children. She looked at Matteo, who was watching the highway. Good, she typed back. Are the children okay? He typed. Sophia is asleep. Matteo is being brave. A pause. Then, he gets that from his mother. Elena looked at that for a moment. She thought about what it cost him to say something that true, and that unguarded in a text message on a day like this one. He gets some of it from you, she typed, whether you see it or not. No response for a minute. 2. Then, keep them safe. Already done, she typed. You go finish this. Months. They arrived at the house upstate at 7:20 p.m. It was smaller than she'd expected. Not a compound or an estate, just a house. Weathered white clapboard and a wide porch and trees that had gone full autumn gold around it. The kind of place that felt like it was from a different version of someone's life. The creek was real. Matteo found it before they'd fully unloaded the car. He stood at the edge of it. It wasn't large, maybe 4 feet across, running fast and clear over flat stones, and looked at it with the assessing expression she'd come to love, the one that meant he was already building something in his head. Good bridge conditions, he said. I told you, Elena said. He looked at her. The autumn light was doing something particular with the trees behind him, gold and amber, and he looked like himself, just himself. A 6-year-old boy with his father's jaw and his own eyes, and a whole world in his head that nobody had thought to ask about until 6 weeks ago. Elena, he said. Yeah. Is Papa going to be okay? She looked at him. She thought about the full weight of everything she'd seen in the past 24 hours. The photograph, Caruso, the service corridor, the filings, Ricci's call, Adrian's face when he'd said the children are vulnerable. She thought about what Matteo was, which was a child, and what she owed him, which was honesty calibrated to what he could carry. Your papa is very good at protecting this family, she said. He's been doing it his whole life, and right now he has a lot of people helping him. She paused. And he knows we're here waiting for him. That matters. That changes how hard he fights. Matteo looked at the creek, then back at her. Okay, he said. He crouched down and started picking up flat stones, turning them over, examining them with the methodical focus of someone beginning a project. Elena watched him. She sat on the bank and pulled her knees up and listened to the creek and the wind in the gold trees, and Sophia inside the house explaining to Captain the dog about their temporary headquarters and Matteo's stones clicking against each other. Her phone was in her pocket, silent. She left it there. She thought, finish it, Adrian, whatever you have to do, finish it. And then she thought about what came after, which was the thing she hadn't let herself think about for 6 weeks, because there wasn't room for it among the immediate things. What came after the crisis? What this was, between her and this family, in daylight, and without the pressure of Ricci's 72 hours or Caruso's hand on her wrist, or documentation and filings and federal contacts and all the machinery of someone else's world that she'd been dropped into and somehow navigated. She thought about what Adrian had started to say in the kitchen. When this is over. She hadn't let him finish. She'd said not right now and meant it. Now she sat by a creek in upstate New York with his children and thought about the rest of that sentence and what she wanted it to say. Matteo placed his first flat stone in the creek. It sat on the bottom, just visible under the water, the beginning of something. Foundation stone, he said seriously. Good choice, Elena said. She picked up a stone of her own and handed it to him, and he placed it deliberately next to the first one, and the creek kept moving around both of them, cold and constant. And behind them the house held its light against the coming dark. And somewhere in Manhattan, the thing that had been building for 11 years was reaching its end, and part 5, hồi kết của kịch bản điện ảnh này, được triển khai với dung lượng 4.000 đến 4.500 từ. Bắt đầu trực tiếp từ điểm kết thúc của part 4, yêu cầu bắt đầu bằng việc giải quyết triệt để đỉnh điểm cao trào từ phần trước. Cuộc đối đầu cuối cùng phải diễn ra khốc liệt và chân thực, nơi mỗi cái giá phải trả đều trở nên đắt đỏ và không có chiến thắng nào là dễ dàng. Hãy đảm bảo mỗi nút thắt, bí mật và mâu thuẫn từ part 1 được phơi bày và xử lý trọn vẹn, standalone ending, không để lại bất kỳ chi tiết thua hay mở ra phần tiếp theo. Duy trì giống văn mỹ thô ráp nhưng sâu lắng, tập trung vào sự biến đổi nội tâm của nhân vật sau cơn bão. Hồi thoại trong phần này cần mang sức nặng của sự chai đồi, cay đắng và chân thực, lồng ghép tinh tế những thông điệp về bản chất con người và ý chí sinh tồn thông qua hành động thay vì triết lý suông. Hãy kể theo ngôi thứ 3, triển khai chi tiết từng phân cảnh, scene by scene, với nhịp điệu chấm dần về cuối để tạo sự lắng động, tuyệt đối không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng, tiêu đề phụ hay nhắc đến thực thể tôn giáo. Hãy trình bày trực tiếp trong tin nhắn, viết cực kỳ chi tiết từng ánh mắt, cử chỉ và hơi thở cuối cùng của câu chuyện. Nếu đặt giới hạn phản hồi, hãy dừng lại ở một câu rạng rỡ để tôi ra lệnh viết tiếp nhằm đảm bảo độ sâu sắc nhất cho kịch bản lồng tiếng 2 tiếng. Chỉ đàn bắt buộc. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu nhằm mục đích giải trí, không dựa trên bất kỳ sự kiện hay nhân vật có thật nào. Lưu ý đặc biệt quan trọng, nếu đạt đến giới hạn trả lời, không được dựng giữa câu, hãy viết nốt câu đó hoàn chỉnh, không mở rộng nội dung. Show more, the creek kept moving. That was the thing Elena held on to during the hours that followed. The sound of it, constant and indifferent. Water over stones. The world continuing its business regardless of what was happening 200 miles south in a Manhattan that felt, from this porch, like a country she'd visited once and wasn't sure she wanted to return to. She put the children to bed at 8:30. Sophia went down fast, the way she always did when she was physically tired, captain tucked under her chin, the unfamiliar ceiling above her apparently not a problem when you were 4 and exhausted from a day of bridge engineering and car travel. Matteo took longer. He lay in the small upstairs bedroom with its slanted ceiling and looked at the window. Same habit, different window, same dark outside it. And Elena sat on the edge of the bed the way she had at 11 p.m. back in the penthouse, waiting. What time will we know? He said. Know what? If everything's okay. She looked at her phone. 8:47. Nothing from Adrian since the text about Park. She'd sent one message at 7 o'clock asking for an update, and gotten a single word back. Working. I don't know exactly, she said. But your dad said 2 days, maybe less. I think less. How do you know? Because he's very good at what he does. She paused, and because he has a reason to be fast. Matteo looked at her in the dim light. Us. You, she said. And Sophia. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the trees moved in wind she couldn't hear from inside, just see. The branches shifting, the last of the gold light gone, and the sky settling into the deep blue black of upstate dark. The kind of dark that doesn't exist in the city. Elena, he said. Yeah. Are you going to stay? After. He said it carefully, the way he said the things he most needed to ask. I know you came for a job. I know that's what it was. But are you going to stay? She looked at him. She thought about the ad at 11:47 p.m., the NDA, the number at the bottom of the listing that had meant she could save her mother's house. She thought about where the job ended and where something else began, and whether that line was visible from where she was sitting or whether she'd crossed it so gradually that she couldn't locate the moment anymore. Yes, she said, I'm going to stay. Because of the job. No, she said, not because of the job. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned onto his side, facing the window, and pulled the blanket up. Okay, he said. She sat there until his breathing changed. Then she went downstairs and sat on the porch in the cold and watched the dark and waited. At 11:23 p.m., her phone rang. She picked up before the second ring. Adrian? It's done. His voice was, she couldn't fully place it, wrung out. Something that had been compressed for a very long time and was now decompressed, and the structure of it hadn't caught up yet. Ricci's federal contact was arrested at 7 o'clock. Ricci himself was taken into custody at his home in Greenwich at 9:45. A pause. Park is cooperating fully with the federal investigation. Voss says the cooperation agreement is substantial. Elena sat very still on the porch. The cold was real. She hadn't brought a jacket, and the temperature had dropped. She felt it on her arms and didn't move. Are you hurt? She said. No. Is anyone? No, it didn't come to that. He paused. There was a moment when it might have. Ricci sent 2 men to the building at 6 p.m. They didn't get past the lobby. His voice went flat on that last part in a way she understood meant there was more to that sentence that she didn't need and he wasn't going to give her. The security team held. She exhaled. She hadn't known she was holding it. The children, he said, asleep, both of them. They're okay. She heard something in the silence on his end, a long exhale, the kind that carries the weight of an entire day inside it. I'll come tomorrow morning, he said, early. There are things here that need to be handled before I leave, documents Voss needs me to review, but I'll be there before noon. Okay. Elena. A pause. I need you to know that the documentation Ricci had, all of it, real and fabricated, has been seized as evidence. Voss says the fabricated portions are already being flagged by the federal team. The chain of construction is clear. Another pause. It's not going to be clean for me. There are real things in those files, and they're going to be examined, and there will be a period of legal exposure. I want to be honest with you about that. She looked at the dark tree line. How bad? Uncertain. Voss thinks the cooperation I've provided, combined with what Crane's testimony establishes about Ricci's coercive relationship with my operation over the years, creates significant mitigation. He said this like a man who had been given cautious news and was relaying it accurately rather than optimistically. It's not over, it's just the immediate danger is over. That's enough for tonight, Elena said. Is it? Yes. She pulled her knees up to her chest on the porch chair. You did what needed doing. Come see your kids tomorrow. The rest gets figured out piece by piece. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing. You stayed, he said. Not accusatory. Not even surprised exactly. Just said, I told you I wasn't planning on leaving, she said. You said that 6 weeks ago and I didn't fully believe it. I know. I believe it now. She sat with that. The creak was audible from here, faintly, behind the house, running in the dark. The cold was in her bones, but she didn't go inside yet. Get some sleep, she said. You sound like a person who's been awake for 30 hours. 31, he said. Go. Good night, Elena. Good night, Adrian. She sat on the porch for another 10 minutes after the call ended. Not thinking exactly, just letting the dark be dark and the creek be a creek and the relief be what it was. Not triumphant, not simple, more like the particular feeling of a pressure that's been on you so long, you forgot what its absence felt like now, present in its absence. Then she went inside and found a blanket and lay down on the small couch in the main room and was asleep in under 4 minutes, which was the deepest and most immediate sleep she'd had in 6 weeks. Adrian arrived at 10:40 a.m. She heard the car on the gravel and came to the door, and he was already coming up the porch steps. He looked terrible in the way that people look when they've run completely out of reserves and are operating on the other side of exhaustion, the side where you become very still and very precise because there's nothing left for anything else. He'd changed his shirt again, she noticed. Someone had made him change his shirt. He stopped on the top porch step and looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. She thought about all the things she could say. You did it. It's over. I told you. We made it. And none of them were quite right, or they were all right, but they were too small for what they were standing on top of. Sophia's at the creek, she said finally. Matteo found a piece of wood that he thinks is structurally significant. Something moved in his face. Captain's there? Captain is supervising. He nodded, came up onto the porch fully. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the 24 hours of everything on him. The shadows under his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his hands hung at his sides with a stillness that wasn't natural but was managed. Can I? He stopped. He looked like a man who had run out of the professional vocabulary that usually got him through moments he didn't know how to navigate. I'm not good at this, he said. At what? He made a gesture that encompassed something she didn't have a name for, or maybe had several names for simultaneously. At saying what I mean when the thing I mean is large. She waited. He looked at her. You walked into this household because you needed a job, and you stayed because my children needed someone to stay. And somewhere in the middle of that you also… He stopped. Started again. You made choices last night that were not in any job description. You found the man in the corridor. You built the strategy that bought us the time we needed. You took my children to safety and sat with them and let them build a bridge by a creek. And you made it not terrifying for them. He paused. I have been trying to figure out what to say about that, and I can't find anything that's adequate. Elena looked at him for a moment. Then don't find something adequate, she said. Just say it. He held her gaze. Thank you, he said. It's not enough, but it's true. She nodded. Go see your kids, she said. He went around the side of the house. She stayed on the porch and listened. After a moment, she heard Sophia's voice, high and immediate, and then a sound she'd heard before but still wasn't fully prepared for. Adrian Valenti laughing. Not the almost smile she'd been cataloging for 6 weeks. An actual laugh, surprised out of him by whatever Sophia had said, real and brief and entirely unguarded. Elena turned and leaned her arms on the porch railing and looked at the trees. She was smiling. She let herself. Bonchan. They stayed 2 more days. It wasn't planned. Adrian made calls from the porch and reviewed documents that Voss sent electronically and had 3 conversations with attorneys that Elena didn't try to hear, and the rest of the time he was at the creek. He helped Matteo with the bridge, genuinely helped, not the performance of helping that parents sometimes do, but actual engagement, crouching on the bank and looking at the structural problem Matteo had identified, and making suggestions and accepting counterarguments from his 6-year-old son with what appeared to be real consideration. On the second afternoon, Elena was sitting on the bank watching this. Adrian and Matteo in focused debate about load distribution. Sophia conducting a parallel diplomatic session with Captain and the rabbit deputy about territorial rights to the left bank, when Adrian looked up and caught her watching. She didn't look away. He held the look for a moment. Something in it that she'd been seeing build for weeks. The thing that didn't have a careful name, that she'd been making herself not name because she'd told herself she was the nanny and there were clear lines and some things needed to not be complicated while other things were already complicated enough. Matteo placed a stone. There, Matteo said. That's the keystone. Adrian looked at the bridge. It was substantial now, 4 days of work, spanning the creek completely with a flat surface of fitted stones and 2 larger rocks as anchors. He looked at it the way you look at something a child has built, when you want to say good job, and it's insufficient because it is actually genuinely impressive. That'll hold, Adrian said. It'll hold Captain and the deputy and Elena, Matteo said. We tested the weight estimate. You estimated my weight, Elena said. Approximated. Matteo said, with dignity. Sophia placed Captain carefully in the center of the bridge. He sat there, small and battered, and loved most of his fur off, and the creek moved around the stones on either side of him, and the bridge held. On the third day, they drove back to the city. It was different, the building. She noticed it the moment the elevator opened. Not the physical space, that was the same marble and glass and too clean light, but the quality of the air in it. The particular held-breath tension that had been layered into the walls for 6 weeks was gone, or partially gone, or gone enough to notice. The security team was different again, smaller, and every face was one she recognized from before Caruso, which meant Adrian had gone back to people he'd had long enough to have actual reason to trust. Santos nodded at her when she came off the elevator, and it was the nod of someone acknowledging a person who'd earned acknowledgement. She went to her room first, set her bag down, stood there for a moment. The room was the same, larger than her apartment, mildly absurd, the window looking north over the city. She'd lived in this room for 6 weeks, and it still didn't quite feel like hers, and she wasn't sure whether that was because it wasn't or because she hadn't let it be. She opened the window a few inches. October cold. The city below doing what it always did, indifferent and continuous. She thought about her mother. She called Ruth before dinner. Ruth picked up on the first ring, which she'd been doing since the car appeared outside her building 3 days ago. Something Elena was going to have to fully explain and was not looking forward to. "You're back," Ruth said. "We're back." And? "And it's handled. It's complicated, but the immediate, it's handled." A pause. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Are the children safe?" "Yes." "Is he—" Ruth stopped. Elena could hear her choosing how to frame it. "Is the man safe?" Elena looked at the window. "Yes. Working through some things, but yes." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Elena, I need you to tell me what you've gotten yourself into. Not tonight necessarily, but soon." "Soon," Elena said. "I promise." "You've been promising me things for 6 weeks." "I've been keeping them too." A pause. Ruth made the sound she made when she was trying not to agree out loud because she didn't want to give Elena the satisfaction. "The people outside my building, are they gone?" "Yes." "As of this morning." "Good. The downstairs neighbor thought I'd gotten into trouble." Ruth paused. "She's not wrong. Her assessment of the situation is partially correct," Elena said, "but it's resolving." "This man," Ruth said, "this employer of yours, what about him? What is he to you?" Elena sat down on the edge of the bed, looked at the window. "I don't know exactly," she said. "Something." "Something," Ruth said. "That's very specific." "Something real," Elena said. "I know that part." Another pause. Ruth's breathing on the line. "Your father said the same thing about me once, when someone asked him early on what I was to him." She said this with a particular tone, not sentimental exactly, more archaeological, like turning something over. "He said something real. I've never forgotten that." Elena closed her eyes briefly. "Okay." "Be careful," Ruth said. "Not afraid. Just careful." "I know the difference," Elena said. "I know you do." A pause. "I want to meet them, the children, when things settle." "They'd like you," Elena said. "Sophia would immediately attempt to appoint Captain as your diplomatic liaison." "I've dealt with worse negotiations," Ruth said. "Call me tomorrow." "I will." 3 weeks passed. The legal process was what it was, slow and expensive and conducted in the formal language of people managing risk on behalf of other people. Adrian met with attorneys and federal representatives and sat through depositions that lasted entire days and came home with the particular exhaustion of a man being processed by a system that doesn't care about individual weight, only categories. Elena watched him manage it. She did not manage it for him. That wasn't what he needed, and it wasn't what she knew how to do for something that large and that procedural. What she did was be present in the evenings when he came back from the meetings and found him in the kitchen and made something to eat and talked about ordinary things, about what Matteo had read that day, about Sophia's ongoing captain saga, about small domestic logistics. until she could see his shoulders change from the formal deposition posture back to something that was actually him. He started staying for dinner more consistently. Then he started staying after dinner. The first night he helped with the dishes, she registered it and said nothing. The second night, Matteo asked him to stay and read. "You do the voices better than you think you do, Papa." And Adrian stayed and read 3 chapters of a book Elena had introduced 2 weeks ago, and she sat in the doorway of the children's room and listened to him do the voices, which were in fact better than he thought. The children changed around him. Gradually, the way things change when you're in them and can't see it from outside, but she could see it. She'd been watching for 6 weeks, and she could track it. Matteo stopped bracing for disappointment every time his father walked into a room. Sophia stopped checking whether his presence was temporary before deciding how much of herself to invest in the interaction. They started trusting the continuity. That was the thing Elena recognized. It was the same thing she'd been building since the first day with the cardboard boxes and the paints. Continuity. The simple, radical act of still being there the next day. 5 weeks after they came back from upstate, Daniel Park accepted a cooperation agreement that the federal attorneys said was one of the most comprehensive submissions in the Financial Crimes Unit's recent history. Voss called Adrian at 4 p.m. to tell him. He came to find Elena immediately after. She was in the playroom. Sophia was painting. Matteo was reading a chapter book he'd selected himself, lying on his stomach on the rug. The room looked like it had been lived in, which it had, which was the entire point. Adrian stood in the doorway. She looked at him and read his face. "Park," she said. "Full cooperation. Voss says it substantially changes my exposure on the real portions of Ricci's documentation." He paused. "There will still be legal proceedings. I'm not walking away from everything clean, but—" He stopped. "But—" "The fabricated documentation is being formally discredited, including the file about Claudia." He said his wife's name quietly, like something he'd had to practice saying again after years of not. "The file claiming I arranged it. Crane's testimony plus the construction records. It's being formally classified as manufactured." His voice was even, but something in the evenness was working hard. I knew I didn't, but there have been 11 years of not being able to prove it, and He stopped. Elena looked at the side of his face. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. He was not going to cry in the playroom in front of his children. She could see the architecture of that decision happening in real time, the same way she hadn't cried in the kitchen 3 weeks ago. There was something almost tender about watching someone else practice the same restraint you'd imposed on yourself. "Come on," she said quietly. She stood, touched his arm, steered him back into the hallway, pulled the door halfway closed behind them. In the hallway, he leaned one shoulder against the wall and put his hand over his face for about 10 seconds. She stood next to him and didn't say anything. After the 10 seconds, he took it away and looked at the ceiling and took a slow breath. 11 years, he said. To the ceiling, not to her. "I know. I spent 11 years. He stopped. Claudia would have. He stopped again. He couldn't find the end of that sentence, or there were too many ends, or the end was too private for the hallway. "You don't have to finish that," Elena said. He lowered his gaze from the ceiling, looked at her. He was close. The hallway was narrow, and they were standing near each other, and he looked at her the way he'd looked at her from across the creek bank, the look she'd been not naming for weeks. "When I walked into the playroom on your first day," he said, "and found you covered in paint arguing with my son about pirate logic." Something moved in his face that was not grief and not quite the smile either, but something that lived in the house between them. "I thought you were going to be the same as the others. Someone I'd have to replace in 3 weeks. "You tried to have me replaced in 3 weeks, she said. "I tried to tell you to leave," he corrected. "There's a difference. I didn't want you to leave. I wanted you to be sensible enough to leave so I didn't have to watch you get hurt." He paused. "You didn't leave." "No. You are the most stubborn person I have ever encountered," he said, "and I have spent 20 years in rooms full of extremely stubborn people." "I prefer determined," she said. "I know you do." His voice had changed, quieter, the formal distance gone, or not gone, but set aside. "Elena?" She waited. "I told you in the kitchen that night that I needed to say something when it was over. He held her gaze. It's over, or it's as over as it's going to get. And He stopped, started again, more carefully. I am not asking you for anything. I'm aware that I have complicated your life significantly, and I'm aware that what I can offer is complicated. Still, even now, the legal process isn't finished. The restructuring of the business is going to take years, and He paused. I'm not an easy person. I noticed, she said. So I'm not asking, he said. I'm just telling you that being around you is the first time in 11 years that this household has felt like something worth staying in. And I needed to say that while I was sober and rested and not in the middle of a crisis, so you'd know I meant it. Elena looked at him. She thought about what she'd said to Matteo on the first day. The only thing I can do is still be here tomorrow, and then the day after that, and then the day after that, until you decide for yourself. She thought about how she'd been applying the same logic to his father without fully acknowledging she was doing it. Adrian, she said. Yes. You said you're not asking for anything. Yes? What if I am? He went still. Not the controlled stillness, the other kind. She looked at him directly. I'm not going to pretend I ended up here by accident, and I'm not going to pretend that what I feel about this family is entirely professional. It hasn't been for a while. She paused. I'm not asking for clean or simple because I'm not naive. But I'm also not going to stand in this hallway and pretend the last 6 weeks were just employment. He looked at her for a long moment. What are you asking for? He said. Honesty, she said, with me and with the children, about what this is and what it's becoming. No more managing information to protect people from worrying. Matteo is 6 years old and he already knows how to read a room. You cannot protect him from reality. You can only teach him how to move through it. She paused. And I need you to understand that I'm here because I chose it, not because I was trapped by a contract or a situation. I chose these children and I chose... She paused. I choose to be here. He looked at her for a long time. His face was open in a way she'd seen only occasionally, in flashes. At the creek with Matteo, in the kitchen at 2 a.m., in the hallway when she'd said, "Go finish this." Open like a person who'd spent so long building walls that the absence of them was slightly structural. Okay, he said. Okay, she said back. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, just took it. His hand was warm and slightly rough and entirely real, and she held it, and they stood in the hallway outside the playroom where his children were painting and reading and being themselves, and that was all, and it was enough. 3 months later, Ruth Marlowe came to dinner. It was a Sunday. Elena had cooked, not the staff, because it was important to her that this be a meal and not a production. She made the pasta she'd learned from her college roommate's mother, the one that took 40 minutes and never looked right until the last 5. Adrian set the table, which he did with the careful attention of a man who hadn't done it in a long time, and was relearning that he liked the simplicity of it. Matteo appointed himself official greeter and stood by the elevator in a sweater he'd chosen himself, which had a picture of a dog on it that he insisted bore no resemblance to Captain, who was a military figure and would not appreciate being reduced to knitwear. Sophia had made Ruth a drawing. She'd been working on it for 2 days in secret, or secret in the way that 4-year-olds are secret, which meant Elena knew and Adrian knew, and Matteo definitely knew, but nobody had told Sophia they knew. Ruth came off the elevator and Matteo said, "Welcome to our home," with the gravity of someone who had rehearsed, and Ruth shook his hand with the equal gravity of someone who understood immediately that he required to be taken seriously, and Matteo's face did the thing it did now more often, the thing that wasn't braced and waiting, but just open, just glad. Sophia appeared from behind Elena's leg and held out the drawing. It was Captain, or a version of Captain. Sophia's artistic style was impressionist at best, standing in front of a building that was either the penthouse or a castle, surrounded by figures that were identifiably a tall man, a shorter woman, 2 children, and a woman with curly hair that Elena recognized with a jolt as her mother. Ruth looked at the drawing for a long moment. "Captain," she said. He wanted to meet you, Sophia said. He's very selective about who he meets. I'm honored, Ruth said. She crouched down, which was not easy on her joints, and she did it anyway. What does Captain do exactly? I've heard a lot about him. Sophia looked at her with the expression of someone being asked to explain something that should be obvious. He's in charge of everything, she said. Ruth looked at Elena over Sophia's head. Her eyes were doing something that Elena recognized from 26 years of being her daughter, the thing they did when Ruth Marlowe was feeling something significant and was choosing not to make a production of it. That makes sense, Ruth said. My daughter's like that too. Dinner was loud. Not the strategic loudness of a household performing normalcy, but the actual noise of people eating together who were comfortable enough to talk over each other. Ruth asked Matteo what he was reading. The answer was a 12-minute summary that covered plot, character motivation, and Matteo's specific critiques of the pacing in Chapter 7. Ruth engaged with every single point, including the pacing critique, which she said she agreed with, which immediately made her Matteo's preferred person at the table. Sophia spent most of dinner on her chair, but migrated gradually toward Ruth until she was leaning against Ruth's arm and explaining Captain's complete legal history, which had grown considerably in complexity over the past 3 months. Adrian was quiet more than he spoke. He ate, and he watched his children. And occasionally he looked at Elena across the table with an expression she'd stopped trying to decode and started just accepting. Something that was present and real and didn't need to be analyzed any more than the creek needed to be analyzed to be a creek. After dinner, he and Elena did the dishes while Ruth sat with the children in the living room. Elena could hear her mother's voice, steady, warm, capable of the same thing Elena had always tried to be in the classroom, which was fully present, present enough that kids could feel it. Your mother, Adrian said, handing her a pot. Yes. She's... He paused. She's where you learned it. Learned what? He looked for the words. How to be in a room without flinching. He paused. How to make a room feel like somewhere you can be. Elena looked at the pot in her hands. She thought about her mother's apartment in Queens, the small kitchen, the bills on the table, the two of them at 11 p.m. after Elena's father died, deciding what the shape of their life was going to be going forward. She thought about the specific education of growing up in a home where love was not a given, but a practice, a daily choice. She had to figure it out herself, Elena said. My father died when I was 13. She had to decide what kind of person she was going to be after that. Adrian was quiet. She decided to be the kind who stayed, Elena said. Whatever happened. She stayed. He took the pot and dried it. Didn't say anything. He didn't need to. 7 months after Elena had come off that elevator into the Valenti penthouse, with a canvas bag and a rolling suitcase and absolutely no preparation, she was standing in the playroom where it had all started. It was different now. The art supplies were more extensive. She'd reorganized them twice and stopped apologizing for the chaos. There were books on a shelf she'd put up, ones she'd brought and ones that had accumulated. There was a corner that had become designated diplomatic space for Captain's ongoing operations, which Sophia governed with absolute authority. The table where she'd first made paint-covered chaos with 2 guarded children was covered now in the debris of a Tuesday afternoon. Matteo's current chapter book, Sophia's latest drawing project, a half-finished model that Adrian had started with Matteo on a Sunday and left in progress because leaving things in progress meant coming back. Elena stood in the center of it. She thought about the night she'd taken the job, the desperation of it, the number at the bottom of the ad, the bills on the kitchen table. She thought about how clear it had seemed then. Take the job, save the money, help her mother. Simple. Transactional. She thought about what had happened instead. Not the danger. She'd made her peace with the shape of that, what it had asked of her, what she'd learned she was capable of when she had to be. Not the resolution. Richie's trial was ongoing. The legal proceedings were slow and complicated. The Valenti name was in the process of meaning something different than it had for a long time, which took time. Not even Adrian, or not only Adrian. The thing she thought about was simpler than that. She thought about Matteo asking, "Are you going to leave with his eyes on the Tower of Blocks?" Not looking at her, because looking made it too much to ask. She thought about Sophia's arms around Captain. She thought about what it felt like to have someone stay. Them. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Light, running ones, which was Sophia. Then heavier, deliberate ones. Matteo, who at 6 years old had already developed a distinct walk, a gait that meant he was paying attention to something. Then a third set, slower, coming from the direction of the office. Sophia appeared in the doorway first, breathless, holding Captain and what appeared to be a large piece of paper. "I made something," she announced. "For who?" Elena said. Sophia came fully into the room and held out the paper. It was another drawing. Her style had developed in 7 months, still recognizably Sophia, but more detailed now, more intentional. It showed a house. Not the penthouse, a house with a yard, the kind Sophia had seen in picture books and apparently filed away. In front of the house were 4 figures. Small, somewhat abstract, identifiable by specific details. The tallest one had a tie. The second one had a book. The smallest one held a dog. And the fourth one, the one between the tallest and the children, had paint on her hands. Deliberate, specific, painted a careful brown, because Sophia had noticed that Elena's hands were usually paint-stained and she had decided this was worth capturing. "That's us," Sophia said. "Our family." Elena looked at the drawing. She thought she'd promised herself she wasn't going to cry in this apartment. She took the drawing carefully. "It's perfect," she said. "I know," Sophia said, with the serene confidence of someone who does not suffer from false modesty. Matteo came in behind her, glanced at the drawing, glanced at Elena's face. He had the look he got when he was recording something for his internal inventory of trustworthy things. Adrian appeared in the doorway. He looked at the drawing in Elena's hands, looked at Sophia, looked at Matteo, looked at Elena last, and his face was the open one, the one with the walls down, the one that had taken 6 weeks to appear and 4 months to become something she could count on seeing. Sophia tugged his hand. "Look what I made, Papa." He crouched down, looked at the drawing. "That's us," he said. "I told Elena that," Sophia said. "She said it was perfect. She was crying a little." "I was not," Elena said. "Your eyes were doing the wet thing." "That's allergies." Sophia looked at her with the expression of a 4-year-old who does not believe in allergies as an explanation. "Papa," she said, "does Elena have allergies?" Adrian looked at Elena. "No," he said, "she doesn't." Elena looked at the ceiling. "Elena," Sophia said, with the patient tone of a child who has decided to be generous. "It's okay to cry about a good drawing." Matteo made a sound that was very specifically not a laugh, and was completely a laugh. Elena looked at the 4 of them, at Sophia holding Captain with absolute authority, at Matteo failing to not smile, at Adrian crouched between his children, looking up at her with the expression she'd stopped trying to be careful around. And she thought about the woman who had walked off an elevator 7 months ago with a canvas bag and a number in her head and absolutely no idea. She thought about what it cost to stay somewhere, not in money, not in negotiation, but in the actual substance of yourself. The daily choice of it, the recommitting, the showing up on the days when showing up is hard and unremarkable and necessary anyway. She thought about how you couldn't know, going in, whether something was worth that cost. You could only find out by doing it. She looked at the drawing in her hands, the 4 figures in front of a house. Paint on her hands, captured in crayon by a 4-year-old who paid attention. She had come here for a job. She had found something she didn't have a word for that was larger than a word anyway. She set the drawing on the table, carefully, where it could dry. "Okay," she said. "Who wants to help me make dinner?" Everyone moved at once.